All right, I am joined once again by Victor and Ethan. Um, feeling good. I think I'm largely plague free at this point. Was just telling Victor before I started. I started writing again yesterday and resumed coffee, booze, and exercise today. So I think I'm all right. Um, but I don't remember which one of you, but one of you brought in this debate as a possibility that we could go over. So can we get a little bit of background on this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess I was the one who suggested it initially, and this is a debate that I just came across maybe soon after it came out, and wasn't familiar with the interlocutor. Like, I guess he goes by Rationality Rules, but had seen some dumb Stefan Molyneux debates before, including like yours, where you were up against him, and that was entertaining. But I skimmed it a little bit recently, but I haven't rewatched it in full. But I remember at the time just being struck by how systematic and careful and fair and charitable this Rationality Rules guy was. But then he ends up getting, I think, to some pretty funny moments of of pushing Stefan into kind of like embarrassing moments, I think, where he, we'll see what happens. But I remember it being quite good. So yeah, hopefully people enjoy.
Cool. Yeah, so I should say something about my history with Stefan Molyneux. So back in 2019, maybe even 2018, but I think 2019, like early 2019, I'd interacted with him just a little bit on Twitter, and he, blocked me, which is fine. I don't think that's I think it's dumb to, sort of take that as some sort of vindication of anything. But the reason he did was funny, because it was because I pointed out that in a book he had written called The Art of the Argument that he got in like the definitions of validity and soundness not only wrong, but like almost exactly wrong, like kind of swapped, which is not great, right? If you're going to write a book about arguments, because it's like the approximate equivalent of like writing a book about statistics, where you where you mix up which one is correlation and which one is causation, right? That's so. So then, of course, this was back when I was doing videos for Zero Books and on Mondays, and so we put out one. About this incident, talking about Stefan, and invited him to have a conversation. And then Nada for about a year. And then, because I remember Matt, he randomly decided that he wanted to debate Matt McManus in it was like very early spring, or even kind of late winter, 2020, because I remember I was getting back. I went to Nevada for a day to like canvass cabbies on the Vegas Strip for Bernie just before the Nevada caucus, and I remember I was like in the airport on my way back when I was getting all this information, and I think Matt reminded him that this offer was on the table, and whatever, and so eventually it ended up happening. I remember the pandemic had already started by the time it was like a few months into it, I think. And so I definitely watched much more Molyneux content than I would normally choose to take in, because I was getting ready to do this. And one of the reasons that I went for this when you suggested it is that the sort of core thing they're talking about is Molyneux's view about what he calls universally preferable behavior, which is his like master theory of all of ethics.
He calls it the holy grail of all philosophy.
Yeah, right. And it's a little bit like the validity and soundness thing. It sort of seems like my impression of it, is that it's like there's stuff that sort of sounds like Kantianism, and there's stuff that sort of sounds like rule utilitarianism, and it's all really pretentious and none of it quite makes sense. But maybe maybe I'll get a better explanation than I'm expected in this debate.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. And actually, speaking of things he doesn't, understand, you said struggling, and I remember when that happened on Twitter. He didn't know what validity and soundness were, and I think here, kind of like a preview note, just watch out. There's going to be moments when the interlocutor, rationality rules kind of offers, oh, did you want to explain this? And you can just tell that Stefan Molyneux has no idea what it is. He's like, no, you can go ahead and explain it. So just watch out for those moments. They're great. And I don't know, actually, are either of you familiar with rationality rules?
I was going to ask who this guy is, actually.
All I really know about rationality rules is he's an atheist YouTuber. He does a lot of philosophy of religion related content. I think back in the day he was sort of a part of the sort of new atheist thing, and now he does more sort of serious engagement with academics and philosophy of religion. He's had Joe Schmidt on his channel a few times. Yeah, that's really all I know about him. I don't watch his videos that much.
Okay, I mean that's interesting though. That would make him one of very few people who evolved out of new atheism in the direction of actually try to make better arguments and all that stuff. Which would be nice.
Yeah, the other thing he has, which looks interesting. I think he and some other people created some game. I guess it's a board game. And I think he sells it on either his website, and it might have been one of those, what are those, campaigns to get funding? What are the GoFundMe campaign? Is that what they're called? Yeah, there's a couple of those. Yeah. And it looks cool because it's a game to teach people logical fallacies. So you have these different cards. I'm not exactly sure how the game works exactly, and then I know there's a Hitch slap card, and he apparently got the Hitchens family permission to use the Hitchens name. So that's kind of a little interesting aside.
That's fun, yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, the thing for anybody who's watching who's not super familiar with Stefan Molyneux, we should also say, so Stefan is theoretically a libertarian. I don't take that very seriously, but that's what he says. He'll actually say that he's a anarcho-capitalist. But he's an anarcho-capitalist who loves Donald Trump, and in particular, loves Trump's immigration policies. He's super duper anti-immigrant, which doesn't seem particularly libertarian of him. And this is the main thing that I kind of spent the last, if you watch the debate that I did with him, which is still available, I know, on the Surfs channel and a couple other places. But if you watch that, I spent the last third of it trying to get him to talk about it, right? Because this just seems like such a just giant egregious contradiction in his worldview. And, I think he... I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, I think he's incredibly racist, and that's the the actual, that's why he has that immigration position. It's not that there's some sort of clever way of reconciling this with libertarianism that nobody's figured out. That it just that's what's really driving the car there. But so we spent kind of the last third of it talking about that, and or at least. Me trying to get him to talk about it, him finally talking about it at the end, and I was, I was happy about that because I got the sort of last word in the, the way it was structured with the opening and closing statements and everything. So I just, since when he finally sort of got baited into talking about it, he said, well, he. Why don't I would agree with him about immigration if I cared about, black people who are going to lose their jobs to Mexican immigrants. And what about, the brain drain from third world countries, that they, from people coming over. And so I got to sort of spend my last moments of that debate saying, well, if what I'm hearing is that we can suspend libertarian principles every time it would be good for black people in the United States or the third world, then we might disagree on a lot less than I thought we did. But yeah, he's just a deeply weird guy. I mean, he's he's got a big reach because we live in a fallen world, but he's a deeply deeply strange person. Like,
does he still have a big reach? I feel like he's kind
or
of.
he had a big reach. He had a big reach. Yeah,
because I guess he got banned off a bunch of platforms, and like I don't know, I haven't seen. He might be on one of those like weird, like edgy platforms where like a lot of conservatives like hang around. I forget what their names are. Maybe
Yeah, I think
but
he's
I
on
really...
BitChute.
BitChute, right?
I don't even really know what that is.
Yeah. And actually, I think it was actually in the debate with you, Ben, where I think he met, because he lives actually not far from me in a city called Mississauga, which is kind of like a suburb of Toronto, right next to Toronto. I've spent some time there, and I think it was in his debate with you, maybe not. He like was like, oh, here in Mississauga, like, you know, you got the call to prayer everywhere, and it's like turning into like a Muslim or something like that. And like, I mean, I can say from spending my time there that I've never seen anything remotely like that. But I like how he tried to make it sound like Canada was becoming this, like, I don't know, like become like instilling. I think he was still pushing that whole like Sharia law, like paranoid conspiracy theory thing.
Yeah, no, that definitely fits. I mean, so the things that you'll notice about Molyneux when you watch this debate, I say very confidently. I'm watching it fresh, but I'm you know, like, okay, one, just his speech patterns make him seem like much more of a sort of like I actually think some of his beliefs are probably very sincere, but like it makes him seem like much more of a actual grifter, because like he sort of always sounds like he's in like a community theater play, and so he's like tried to do like like upper class bring in a British accent, and there are going to be some weird rape analogies. I can say that with 100% confidence. There always are, and yeah, he just likes to kind of like bat his eyelashes in the direction of some really depraved things without ever quite saying them, right? You know, like the sort of ultimate example of this is a video where he said, you know, I'm not a white nationalist. But I think that might actually be a quote from the video down to the intonation.
I think, wasn't the rest of his argument like, I'm not a white nationalist, but I went to Poland and they seemed really happy with all the white people, you know?
Yeah, something. I think you're right.
Yeah. Yeah, he's like, but I am an empiricist. All right.
Well, I'm excited for this one.
Yeah, let's get it started.
Let's see what's going on. And we are there on YouTubiness. Oh, things are looking sharp. Things are looking vaguely hirsute. And I was going to throw this out to a couple of different places. And we will get started in a couple of minutes. Thank everybody so much for dropping by. It's a great pleasure to have you and a great pleasure to host Rationality Rules. And looking forward to a nice, enjoyable, lengthy, deep stream, wide-bellied debate. Well, not wide-bellied, but everything else totally makes sense. Not too bad, not too bad. All right, so let's just throw this out to a couple of social media places, because automation apparently is my complete enemy. So hold on just a sec here.
It would certainly be good if we had one button for it all, hey?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. So yeah, looking good. And let me just make sure everyone can get a hold of our feed. Everybody's got to kick over from my setup. I'm sorry, I was, of course, the whole idea was to have this thing set up ahead of time. It is a British thing to do. It's a good reason to give Hong Kong philosophy and the work of virtue and the work of discerning truth from falsehood, because I think it could be easily well argued that what's going on in the world at the moment has a lot to do with.
Yeah, thank you everybody for tuning in. I hope you're having a lovely evening.
Yeah, it's a great pleasure to see everybody interested in philosophy. And of course, I am naturally completely aware that there is a lot of rioting and a lot of all this going on. Like, I get all that, and I sympathize with all that, and that means a lot to me. But we do have to kind of continue with the work of philosophy and the work of virtue and the work of discerning truth from falsehood, because I think it could be easily well argued that what's going on in the world at the moment has a lot to do with rejecting reason, rejecting evidence, and sliding into the Dionysian pit of emotional reaction. So let's continue our work with the awareness, of course, that there is smoke drifting across America at the moment. And if we can either provide something positive regarding that or put a little bit of fertilizer in the cultural mix to grow some more friendly plants, that would be very helpful and excellent as well. So we will keep on with that, because part of me was like, oh man, so much is going on, we should postpone this. And I'm like, no, let's not let the evil people and the wrongdoers and the rioters and the looters and so on stop us from the essential work of philosophy. And that is the plan.
If we stopped philosophy every time there was a mark of evil, philosophy would never occur. So
yeah, that's very true. Very true. Very true. All right. So I think we can. Let me just make sure I'm on the right tab here, because Lord knows I could use a couple more tabs, right? All right, everybody. Thank you, everyone, so much for joining us. I'm here with Rationality Rules, and I guess we've been batting forth some arguments and ideas and insults and yo mamas back and forth like a bunch of backyard hooligans with a basketball for a couple of years. So we are going to do this face-to-face thing.
That was an interesting analogy.
We are going to hash it out. This really is the most essential topic that there is in philosophy, in my opinion. Philosophy can do a lot of great things, but I think where it really shines and what differentiates itself from other mental disciplines is in the realm of ethics and virtue, what I call universally preferable behavior. What we're going to have, of course, Stephen, the Rationality Rules, tell us his approach to that. And so this is it, man. This is the key. This is the core of philosophy. It's not about material sciences, that's physics. It's not about life sciences, that's biology. It's really about ethics and good life, the achievement of happiness and integrity, and the appropriate levels of Aristotelian moral courage, all of that kind of good stuff that can help you in your daily life. And so that's what we are about. That's what we're into. Today, we're going to be talking about ethics and virtue. And I guess the core is, I can feel I'd calling you rationality. That feels like a bit of a surrender up front. I'm going to refer to you as reason and correct. That's going to be, it feels like that's a little bit leaning into the wind. So, because Stephen is fine, right?
Yeah, Steve's fine. Stephen or Steve, I don't.
Steve, all right.
Are you okay with Steph/Stefan?
Oh yeah, it's totally fine. Wait, you want to slash Stefan? You want to slash? No, I'm just kidding. All right. So we are going to talk about ethics and see if we can come to some kind of resolution. I do have, I had some audio stuff queued up. I'm going to have to read it because it's not working with this restream. Doesn't really matter in particular, but I will, of course, post my links to issues that I have with Stephen's approach afterwards. But for those in the audience who don't know you, I don't know that that's too many, at least in my audience. I wonder if you could introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself, your history with philosophy, and make sure people can find what they need to find from you on social media and on the web.
Yeah, of course. First of all, to everybody listening, thanks for taking the time on a Sunday, no less. It's very, very generous of you, and I appreciate it. My name is Stephen Woodford. I run the YouTube channel Rationality Rules, which is dedicated to debunking, which is to say, revealing the logical fallacies and philosophical inconsistencies in theological and pseudoscientific arguments. And a couple of years ago, I took a swing at UPB. I believe that I found a few mistakes, as it were, a few begging the questions, etc. I conveyed them to Stefan. Stefan did a reply. As you said, Stefan, we've had a mixture of good philosophy thrown at each other, / a few names over the years. It's been a good giggle, but we're both tough YouTubers. That's what it's all about. And today we're hoping to resolve the issues, to have some good conversations. So hopefully we will have a fruitful exchange.
Well, I think we can't help but have a fruitful exchange, even if we end up parting without either one of us changing our mind. We will have further clarified and illuminated our positions for the lovely audience. And that to me is what it's all about. So we're going to start with something called a steel man, which is a phrase I learned from you, I think, in regards to your exposition on the Jordan Peterson Sam Harris debate. So can you tell people what a steel man is and why we're going to do it?
Yeah, sure. So A still man is, you can see it as the opposite of a straw man. So one of the things you most regularly see in people, when people disagree with each other, is they straw man each other's argument. They make it weaker than what it actually is, so that it looks like they've taken it down, and with a little bit of sophistry and rhetoric, they can get a long way. But the point being is that they haven't actually dealt with the argument itself. A still man is a good faith attempt to try and present the argument better, or to the standards that the person who adheres to it would acknowledge and accept. So me still manning UPB basically would be trying my best to make it as strong as I possibly can, perhaps even stronger than I think Stefan has presented it. That would be an example.
Excellent. And then, because we are both into philosophy, I think it's well worth defining our terms, because Lord knows, I mean, having watched some of the Peterson Harris stuff, the way in which those guys can go round and round to the point where you don't know your ass from a hole in the ground, I think can be kind of frustrating. And most, of course, of what we do in philosophy is trying to get to the truth. And I believe that 95% of getting to the truth is at least getting an agreement on terms. So we're going to do that to make sure, because, you know, language is a tricky and slippery thing. I mean, you say something like truth and it's like everybody kind of knows what that means, but it can mean a very different thing to somebody who's religious, to somebody who is scientific, to somebody who's a Platonist, to somebody who's an Aristotelian, to somebody who's an objectivist. So all this kind of stuff we need to define. So, you know, I guess what I'm saying is get comfortable, people, because we're going to be chewing through a lot of stuff, but I promise you it is going to be immensely illuminating for all of us. So do you want to steel man first? Do you want me to take a swing at it, and then we'll get into our definitions?
You know, I'm absolutely happy to throw down a steel man, and as you said, you know, do a good job, then UPB's on the table for everybody, and that's obviously the best place to start. As you said, Voltaire said, if you want to debate me, define your terms. And if I fail, then it gives you ample opportunity to fix where it went wrong. And in any case, we have UPB clearly on the table. So I'll give it a go. And to preface it, I'm going to employ a metaphor that you used in your book, only just for a small while, because I think it's actually a really good one. It represents just what's at stake. And that is that you said there is a terrible beast of stupendous power, a dragon or a basilisk, which tyrannizes the surrounding lands. Wave after wave of champions, such as the likes of Socrates, Plato, Hume, and Kant, try to match their strength against this tyrant, try and fail. This beast is the belief that it is impossible to define an objective, rational, secular, and scientific ethical system. It is the holy grail of philosophy, and the desperate villager's only hope is for a man to appear who can defeat the beast. You believe that you are that man? That's fair play, man. Before leaving the tavern to fight the beast, you equip your arm.
I just want to say, this is my first time encountering that particular metaphor, and I've already thrown up in my mouth like 6 times hearing that. Like, who talks? Okay, never mind. That's fine. Let's just watch.
Armor and weapons by noting a few philosophical concepts, I would say, with a trusted sword being the notion of self-contradictory arguments, which you refer to as self-defeating in the book and also self-detonating. To give a few examples, you can't communicate to someone that you don't exist, since communication requires existence. You can't say that there's no such thing as truth, since one could easily retort, is that true? And you can't say that language is meaningless, since in order to verbally communicate that language is meaningless, language must at least have some meaning, right? Now, with this sword held tightly in your grasp, you declare that those preferences which can be considered binding on others can be termed universal preferences or moral rules. Murder, theft, arson, rape, and assault are all proven immoral. You do this by charging up to the beast, if you will, and striking it with such blows as: stealing can't be UPB, since the act of wanting something requires consent, and the act of being stolen from requires you not giving consent. Another one is: rape can never be moral, since any principle contradictory arguments, which you refer to as self-defeating in the book and also self-detonating. To give a few examples, you can't communicate to someone that you don't exist, since you can't say that there's no such thing as truth, since one could easily retort, is that true? And you can't say that language is meaningless, since in order to verbally communicate that language is meaningless, language must at least have some meaning, right? Now, with this sword held tightly in your grasp, you declare that those preferences which can be considered binding on others can be termed universal preferences or moral rules. Murder, theft, arson, rape, and assault are all proven immoral. You do this by charging up to the beast, if you will, and striking it with such blows as: stealing can't be UPB, since the act of wanting something requires consent, and the act of being stolen from requires you not giving consent.
Okay, I wanted to go back to make sure I'd heard that. This is the very first example that we're getting. So just to start, like, it is absolutely insane to say that every time somebody, that like all of morality can just be derived from like not being logically inconsistent. That sounds like a parody of like Kantianism, right? I mean, like, Kant knows better than that, so the very first example is it's logically inconsistent, supposedly, to say that stealing is bad, because in the first part of the explanation is the act of wanting requires consent, and I had to go back and listen to that again, because I don't, what does that mean, the act of wanting requires consent?
Yeah, it's it's pretty puzzling. Yeah, I don't know what to say. I mean, I think I have to give, Rationality Rules props, though, for like doing his best to represent it, and to the extent that I think he's even capturing the strange inconsistencies in a way that you can see, Stefan Molyneux like nodding along, like yes. But yeah, it's very strange.
Yeah, I'm just puzzled. Like, I don't know what it means to say wanting something requires consent.
Yeah.
Like, is it that you have to consent to wanting it, or like, I don't understand.
Or for your want to be, I mean, it does sound like sneaking in some kind of like Kantian, like if you can't universalize it or something. So like if your desire can't be like acceptable by everybody, but I mean, that's the only like most generous, I guess, interpretation that I can give it, which I think earlier.
Say one more time. I want to make sure.
I just said. Well, I think like the most, I guess it sounds like, and I think you mentioned earlier at the beginning of the broadcast or whatever, that it just sounds like a bit like the Kantian argument, like the kind of categorical imperative, like, if you can't universalize it. So like, I guess maybe he's using desire in the sense of like the consent part is like people, like actions that have to be like universalizably acceptable by everybody. But like, I don't really get it. Like that still wouldn't really make sense. I mean, it doesn't make much sense.
Yeah, I mean, there's got to be more in it than he's giving, or it.
Well, he goes on, so we'll see. But
okay, all right, fair enough. Now, what am I saying? Stefan Molyneux, this might be it. But anyway, let's see.
Maybe it is.
Another one is rape can never be moral, since any principle that approves it automatically contradicts it. If rape is justified on the principle of, let's say, taking pleasure is always good, then such a principle immediately fails the test of logical consistency, since the rapist may be taking pleasure, but the victim certainly isn't. The same, of course, goes for murder and assault. Or another way to put this thesis would be, and this is a bit more colloquial, see it as almost like a second Stillman, but in more general language. The essence of UPB is to say that if we're going to propose a theory of universally preferable behavior, then it needs to fulfill three conditions. If you're going to make a statement about universally preferable behavior, it needs to be universal, in other words, independent of time and place. So independent of time and place. It also needs to be something which human beings can prefer, although it doesn't have to be what they always do prefer. And it has to be behavior, because as an empiricist, you can't just read minds. And so the first question in UPB is, well, is even the concept of universally preferable behavior valid at all? And you maintain that the answer is yes. And your primary argument is, look, if you want to correct me according to some universal standard, if you want to tell me there's no such thing as universally preferable behavior, then what you're telling me to do is to stop saying that there's such a thing as universally preferable behavior. If you say to me that something is universally, put this way, if you say to someone that it is universally preferable behavior, that you stop arguing for universally preferable behavior, Well, that, of course, is a self-detonating statement. It is a statement that falsifies itself in the very utterance. The moment you engage in the correction of someone according to universal standards, you are enacting universally preferable behavior. Now, once we accept that, the question doesn't become, is universally preferable behavior valid? The question then becomes, which universally preferable behaviors are valid? Now, I could go into some sub-arguments, one being, what about the Schrodinger's critic, right, who never criticizes you? But I'm going to leave that off the table because I think that what I've presented is the core. How do you feel about that, and how would you like to add/take away to it?
No, that's I think that's good. I do enjoy hearing my own writing come back to me. I just wanted to mention that because I'm a big fan of Aristotle as far as content and metaphysics and epistemology goes, but I'm a huge fan of Plato when it comes to rousing metaphors and analogies that really bring things to life. So I'm obviously my own harshest critic when it comes to just about everything I put out. Well, you actually might be second, but it is just nice to hear that. So yeah,
I did want to just say a note on that, if that's okay, Steph. And I'm sure you don't mind the criticisms, as it were, but I just wanted to say it's not personal or anything. It's like, as you said before, YouTube is just give and take, and it's a bit of fun. It's a bit of banter. It's part of the parcel, as you've explained to others.
Sure. Now, yeah. So the issue is there are 4 bans that just about every reasonable moral system has at its core, and the question is why. So the bans are on rape, theft, assault, and murder. And UPB says, okay, well, theft, stealing can't be universally preferable behavior. It's impossible because stealing is asymmetric, which means if you want something to be stolen, in other words, if stealing is universally preferable behavior, then everyone should want to steal and be stolen from because it's universal. But if somebody wants to be stolen from, it can't be theft. In the same way that if somebody wants to have sex, it can't be rape. And if somebody wants to be assaulted, it's boxing or YouTube. So we can't have rape, theft, assault, and murder as universally preferable behaviors, which is why there tend to be bans on these things. And that kind of establishes it as the sort of foundational moral ethics. Of course, property rights are validated by universally preferable behavior because we own ourselves and we own the effects of our actions, right? So as Steve points out, I wrote UPB, it's my argument, it's my book, it's my toy, it's my ball, I'm going home if I don't win. No, it's my book, right? So I sat down and thought about and wrote and typed out and narrated UPB. So I am responsible for myself and I'm responsible for the effects of my actions. I know that there's determinism in the mix, which maybe we can get to in a little while, but just as far as I go. So you get property rights, you get moral responsibility, and you get bans on rape, theft, assault, and murder. And that's a pretty tidy bow to put around a moral system. So I appreciate that. That's a fairly good summation. And I really like the fact that you got to the rape, theft, assault, and murder part, because everybody seems to get clogged on the sewage of UPB as an initial methodology and not what it establishes after you get past the gate. So I'll take a swing at your objections, if that makes sense. Sorry, go ahead.
If it would be okay, because I guess if we want to get down to the nitty-gritty as effectively as possible, would you mind giving a go at stillmanning Immanuel Kant's hypothetical and categorical imperative? Because that is the main criticism I'm going to be throwing at you today. Would that be okay by you?
Do you guys think you can do it?
The Kant's categorical imperative?
Both of them, the categorical and hypothetical. Please.
I'm not an expert on Kant, but from what I recall, the categorical imperative goes something like, act as if the principle of your action becomes a general maxim for everyone. And that's not the same as UPB. So for instance, you could say, if I'm the, sorry, you're just bringing out a loop there, your autofocus is...
No.
Yeah, it's fine. So if I'm the strongest man in the village, I can say, I'm perfectly happy to have the strongest, a contest of strength be how we determine the resource allocation in the village, or who gets the pretty girl or prettiest guy if I'm a strong woman or whatever. So there are ways in which taking your own principle of action, making it a universal principle, can end up with non-universally preferable behavior. So if you're the meanest and toughest guy and you have no conscience, you might say the capacity for brutality is how we should organize things in society. And then the more sensitive souls among us would be kind of plowed under by that combine harvester. So I do have particular criticisms.
Well, he's right. He's not an expert on Kant.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't think he asked him about the hypothetical imperative too, which we'll see if he takes a stab at that.
Yeah.
Of Immanuel Kant. Plus, of course, Immanuel Kant, in his application of his philosophy, ended up saying you have to obey the king, the prince, the ruler, no matter what. And that's by your fruits shall you know them, so to speak, right? I mean, if you end up in your moral philosophy saying, well, okay, if Hitler tells you to kill Jews, then you just go kill Jews, then something's gone wrong along the way. That's not a good outcome to get out of your philosophy. So Kant's philosophy is one of the things that laid the foundations for some of the totalitarian horror of the 20th century. That's not specifically a disproof of hypothesis, but it is sort of an example of, or an indication that he may have gone wrong somewhere.
Sure. So, like, if you don't mind, I'll stick it on the table just because it's really clean. Like, you're correct on the categorical aspect of it being something that applies categorically, but just for everybody listening, because I think it's a really important point because it relates to a lot of my criticisms. Kant came up with two things, and that is a hypothetical imperative and a categorical imperative.
And the hypothetical is like the if-then, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yes. So hypothetical imperative is an action that you should do if and only if you want to promote some goal, whereas a categorical imperative is an action that you should do no matter your goals. To put this in terms of logic, hypothetical imperatives are formulated as if you want X, do Y, whereas categorical imperatives are formulated as just do Y. So just a few examples for everybody. And a hypothetical would be, if you want to stay out of prison, you must not murder. It's basically, you can only say you must not murder given that goal. Whereas a categorical imperative would simply say, do not murder, or thou shalt not kill. Another hypothetical would be, if you want to keep your job, you should not steal. Whereas a categorical would simply be, do not steal. And another one would be, if you want to live, you ought not eat a handful of arsenic. Whereas a categorical would be straight up, you ought not eat a handful of arsenic. So thanks for letting me stick that on the table, and I appreciate that fact. So
no, I appreciate it. And before we, and I think it's worth, and I'm definitely going to do your steel man, but I think it's sort of worth referring to the donut hole that we're currently trying to inhabit in the West in philosophy and thought, because the question of the categorical imperative was answered in the past by religion. Now, Steve and I are both atheists, and we are both very pro-science, and we're into objective reality, we're into reason, we're into empiricism, and self-contradictory thoughts are invalid. And I mean, I'm not speaking, I think I speak for you in far as all of that goes. So this is the funny thing, that we have an enormous amount in common, I guess, like brothers who fight the most or whatever, but we do have a huge overlap, and we're both trying to deal with this issue. How the hell do you get morality without the commandments that come from a deity? Because the answer as to why shouldn't you steal for religious people in general, Christians and I mean, all the Old Testament religions, right, Judaism and Islam and Christianity, their answer is, well, don't steal because God says, thou shalt not steal, and God is the moral arbiter of the universe, and God is all powerful and all knowing and all good and all that kind of stuff. So that's, that's asked and answered. Now, it's not an answer, philosophically speaking, at all. It's merely the assertion. It's the ultimate argument from authority. And so it is not an answer to say that this was written down, it is derived from an all-knowing, all-powerful, all-virtuous God, and that's why you have to do it. That is no more an answer than saying, where did life come from? Well, God rolled some snakes in clay and breathed some life into them. It's the illusion of an answer that prevents further exploration. And so we're out here in sort of interstellar depths of the post-religious moral landscape, trying to figure out, because we kind of need to figure it out, right? We need to figure out how people can be good. Why should we be good? What is goodness? And neither of us, and I imagine a fair number of the audience here, is not particularly satisfied, and philosophically you shouldn't be, by edicts from a supernatural being. That is not how we're going to get philosophical answers. That may be the province of theology. It certainly is the province of faith, but faith in many ways is the opposite of rational exploration, of science, of empiricism, and so on. So that's why this topic is so big, and it is huge. You know, again, we talked earlier about the columns and pillars of smoke rolling across America at the moment. That's people who don't believe that they can reason with each other, and so they're taken to the streets and there's violence. If we lose reason, if we lose the conversation, we gain nothing but...
Okay, it's been like 5 minutes. I don't think the rationality rules guy is going to correct him about the categorical imperative.
No, I don't think so.
So
I think he's made, if I remember correctly, I think he's kind of made a strategic decision to sort of like not nitpick everything because he wants to get a bigger, more specific point across. But yeah, I think he's letting a lot of things fly for that reason.
No, that's, that makes sense, right? I think you kind of have to, like sometimes when people, when you're talking to somebody who says like 20 crazy things a minute, you have to pick and choose which ones you're going to respond to. But this is important, right? So let's pause on this. Ethan, what's the categorical imperative?
Putting him on the spot there, right?
Well, I mean, the concept of a categorical imperative,
Sure.
I think like Stephen got that roughly right, which is just, it's an ought that's not preceded by an if.
Sure.
It's just like you ought to do X. I mean, the categorical imperative, like from Kant, I mean, there is a variety of formulations. I mean, there was like the mere means formulation, like you shouldn't treat people as mere means. There was the universality one, which is sort of don't do that which you can't rationally will be a universal law. I'm pretty sure that's how it went.
No, that's exactly right. So that's the one that Stefan got twisted into whatever your particular idiosyncratic preferences are. You should just want everybody to have them. Which is not at all, which is like really, really, really different from what it is, right? So, yeah,
which is probably where he got the weird, which is where he probably got that weird idea that Kant led to like totalitarianism or something, which also made no sense.
Yeah, no, exactly. So the formula of universal law. So, right. So again, Stephen correctly said what a categorical imperative is as opposed to a hypothetical imperative, but Kant thinks there's just one categorical imperative, although confusingly he gives all these different formulations of it, like you said, Ethan. But the one that Stefan is thinking of is act only on that maxim that you could, like rationally could, will to be a universal law, right? In other words, that if it were a universal law, if everybody were acting this way, this wouldn't undermine your reason for acting that way in the first place. So like classic example is like if you're lying, then you lie for the purpose of being believed, right? Any purpose you hope to achieve with lying is, it's only going to work if people believe it. But if everybody told lies in similar situations, then nobody would believe it. So it being universalized would undermine your reason for doing it in the first place. Which, notice, whatever you think about this, and I'm certainly not somebody who thinks that Kant got all of morality right, in the late 1700s, but like whatever you think about this is already like way more plausible than saying that like there's going to be a literal logical contradiction every time somebody's doing something immoral, which seems to be what this universally preferable behavior stuff is. And it's certainly absolutely nothing like, whatever your, preferences happen to be, right? You should want everybody to have that. I have no idea where he's getting that. And yeah, also there's other especially when you bring in those other formulations, most famously the other one that Ethan mentioned, which is the formula of humanity, which says that you should always treat humanity, whether in your own person or that of another, as an end in itself and not merely a means to an end. So the part of that that's easiest to understand, at least, is you shouldn't treat other people as if they had no importance beyond being used as means to your ends, which, anyway. I know that's like 5 5 minutes of being pedantic, and I apologize for that, but like this is just in terms of like communicating the sort of basics of the history of philosophy, like what Stefan did a minute ago was kind of a minor war crime. So I just didn't want to go on until we'd gone through what the actual difference between that and Kant was. We can get back to his stuff about how the police brutality riots in 2020 means that, you know, man has given up on reason or whatever he's saying here.
I wonder if like one of the reasons why, you know, he's like, I wonder if that's, I'm just thinking about like tactically, like he just says so many wrong things all the time that like it just tempts people to like want to pick up every little point he makes. And then like that maybe back in the day gave his audience the impression that like he's really good at like triggering the libs, but really it's just that like he says so many wrong things. And it just ends up working in like somehow his rhetorical advantage, because I think it's like hard not to want to point out all those things, you know?
Fair enough.
Yeah, I'm still kind of like confused about his like, I guess his overarching claim. Like he gave a couple examples, like rape can't be moral because any principle that could approve of rape like ends up contradicting it. But like, I mean, that just seems like I could say I'm going to commit rape and I'm going to do it because like I'm an egoist and I value only my pleasure, right? And I don't see how the fact that somebody else is suffering as a result of that contradicts that, right? Because he said that like if you approve of rape because it produces pleasure, then that principle is gonna end up contradicting the idea that rape is good because the other person is going to experience suffering. But it's like you don't have to justify rape on the basis of you know, pleasure in general is good. It could just be like my pleasure or something. Like there's a ton of potentially completely coherent ways where you could like say it's okay on your view to like commit rape with no like contradiction.
Yeah, I mean, it almost sounded at one point like the idea is that everybody has to, it has to at least make sense for everybody to approve of it, and that people can't approve of theft or rape because or, you know, assault, because if you're approving of theft, you're approving of being stolen from, that it's not really stealing, you're giving it away, you know, and same for those other things. But this seems to prove way too much because, you know, one thing we know that he definitely wants to do with this is certify libertarian property rights except for immigrants. And so if that's the case, right, well, hold on, right? If are we supposed to imagine everybody approving of not being allowed to use certain pieces of property, right? Being like excluded as a trespasser, you know, from some piece of property? Because if so, then you just chose not to go on there. You're being excluded as a trespasser. Yeah,
and it's also hard to see how like, because his claim is like a really big claim. Like you're affirming a contradiction if you you know, if you accept certain moral principles. But it's like if the idea is just not everybody would approve if you did this, then it's like it's hard to see how me affirming for whatever reason that X is okay is contradicted by the fact that like other people think that X is not okay, or that from their perspective X is not okay. Because if my sort of like normative evaluation or like my framework is insensitive to those people's preferences or desires, then there's no contradiction, right? Between their disapproving and my approving, I guess.
Fair enough. All right, let's plunge on.
Endless war and conflict. And of course, we saw this in Europe, 300 years of civil war based upon religious groups trying to wrestle control of various state governments in order to impose their views on everyone else and avoid having other people's views imposed upon them, to the point where Europe said the only way we can survive is to separate church and state. And so that's where we are, and this is why it is so absolutely essential. If we can't be good, if we can't self-restrain, we can't have a civilization, because the government can't play whack-a-mole. I mean, you see this, all of these rioters out there, they're not doing the right thing. And I'm not talking about the protesters. Protesters is perfectly fine. But the rioters out there, they have overwhelmed the body politic. If we don't have self-restraint, if we don't have internal management and an internal way to be good, we lose everything. Like, so this is really, really important, this conversation. So If there's anything you want to add to that, I'll get into the Steelman, but I just really wanted to put that context for our listeners and I guess for the world.
No, I mean, I appreciate all that you're saying there, and I agree with that we need objective morality. You and I share something in common. That is that I'm really not a fan of nihilism. I agree with Nietzsche. I think it's something that takes actually incredibly smart people and makes them stand idle and just watch horrific things happen and not interject. And I think they're philosophically consistent. I just think they're not looking at it correctly. So you and I are quite unique in the sense that we're both moral realists, but we get there through different means, as it were. You were saying about stillmanning. As far as I'm concerned, you've done it. You stillmanned my major criticism, as it were, which is Kant's hypothetical imperative. And so far as I understood, we're here to debate UPB. So I'm happy.
Let me just do one. Sorry to interrupt. I'll just literally do like two minutes of the Steelman, because I really want people to understand at least my perspective of where you're coming from and your critique of UPB.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So your critique of UPB is centered around the idea that I'm violating the is-ought dichotomy. So the is-ought dichotomy is you cannot get a value from a fact. So values are human constructs that do not exist. And so the problem is morality is you should, you ought to, it's good, it's bad, it's right and wrong, it's moral, it's immoral, and punishment and all of that. Morality nowhere exists in nature. Shoulds and oughts, absolute rules exist in nature. I mean, there's gravity, there's electromagnetism, there's like all of these physical properties, radiation and ozone and oxygen, all of these things exist in nature. But just because you need air to live doesn't mean that somehow everybody ought to provide it to you or not strangle you to block it. There's nothing in nature that says we should or should not do things. And of course, people have their impulses, they have their instincts. Some people want to live peacefully, other people want to take stuff by force and so on. But in the natural world, there is no such thing as virtue. In fact, there is no such thing as truth in the natural world. Truth is a human construct that is the relationship between concepts in the mind and things in the world, whether it's accurate or inaccurate and so on. So the philosophical concepts that we treasure the most, truth and virtue and courage, these don't exist in nature. And trying to find a way to extract an ought or a should from the mere facts of nature is a doomed enterprise. You always have to summon some imaginary bridge between what is and what ought to be, and try and link the two, and it's a fool's quest. And because UPB is building its castle on the same of trying to extract an ought from an is, which is absolutely completely and totally impossible, it's a clever construct, but it doesn't rest on anything. And if you just want to shrug it off and walk away, you can totally do that viably by just saying, hey, you can't get an ought from an is, and UPB is all about the oughts, done and dusted, as they used to say when I was a kid.
I think that's fairly accurate. Yes. I just had a couple of extra bits. They're not necessary, but just to tighten it, as it were. I do believe truth exists. And one of the biggest confusions about Hume is that people think that he was saying you cannot get an ought in nature in general, which is not quite. I don't know if you would agree with this sense, but certainly my reading of him, and the most popular by philosophers, is that you can get oughts in reality, but they're the kind of oughts that relate to hypothetical imperatives. You could say, if you don't want to go to prison, you ought to murder, for example. Hume saw no issue with that. The main thing he was criticizing is that, particularly religious people, they would be saying, look, premise one, God exists. Premise two, he wants you to not murder, and then therefore you should not murder. And the should doesn't follow from the is statement. You've got a factual statement, a factual statement. That should doesn't make any sense. You could argue it by referring to hypothetical imperatives or perhaps a categorical, but he was just warning for that. So yeah, good job. I think that's more than fair.
And if we can't find a way to extract morality from,
it's also a terrible explanation of the Hume's point about his aunt.
Yeah. I mean, it was really bizarre, like, the way Stefan described it. I mean, it was super vague, like he says, like, the is-ought gap asserts that morality doesn't exist in nature or something. But I mean, it's like, that's not true. I mean, there are, like, moral naturalists who accept that the Izot gap is like a legitimate thing, right? Like the Izot gap isn't saying that moral values don't, like, I don't know, supervene on natural properties or whatever. It's just saying you can't like do a valid deduction where all of the premises are descriptive and the conclusion is normative.
Yeah, so Stefan's explanation of the Izot gap seems to assume that if you believe that there is a gap there, right, that there is this logical gap that that you can't derive conclusions from unmixed is premises, right? You need to have an ought premise there too. Like he seems to equate that with this meta-ethical issue, right? Like that, well, oh, if you think that, you must think that values are human constructs. Like, no, separate issue, right? Like you can think anything about what moral values are and still see that they can't be derived logically from non-moral facts, right? I mean, this is go back to Kant, right? In the groundwork of metaphysics of morals, he said, like he gives this this example about how the same medical science that can teach you how to teach a doctor how to save somebody's life could also teach him how to could also let him know how to poison him without anybody finding out, right? Medical science by itself can't tell you which one to do, right? You need to have a moral premise in there. So yeah, you could think that morality is objective, you could think it's not objective, you could think any of these things and still you can think that you can think that there's objective morality that is ultimately these are some kind of weird natural facts, and you could still say that, well, claims about them, right, can't be derived just from like regular non-moral facts, right? Which is, I mean, this is like Stefan is trying to stack the deck here against this idea by saying, well, if you accept it, you have to be some sort of social constructivist, relativist, something about morality, but that just absolutely does not follow.
Just also quickly a point, an aside to some things that I'm seeing in the chat.
Yeah.
So we're not actually in the debate yet. Some people might have come in later because people are like, what kind of a debate is this? I don't understand. And like, so they're actually just steel manning each other's positions. I think that segment's just pretty much over, and then they're going to start debating. So just in case people were a little confused about the tone of what was being said.
All right, well, let's get to that.
From anything, then of course the big fear or the big challenge is, okay, what if I don't care about going to prison? I was going to go kill people. What if I can get away with it? This is one of the big problems in the modern world, and I think all throughout human history, is that when people gain, for instance, the power of the state, then they can escape negative consequences for what they're doing. I mean, you can see, of course, a wide variety of people, both in contemporary and historical human society, that, well, they get a hold of the state. They can just do pretty much whatever the hell they want. They can start wars. They can print money. They can go into debt on other people's behalf. They can throw people in jail based upon a whim. They can use the power of the state to target political groups and spy upon political groups that they don't like. And they can get away with it because they've got the power of the state. And so the if-then, if you don't want to go to jail, then you can do whatever you want. That is a big problem because there are many, many circumstances in human society where you can be virtually guaranteed of getting away with something. And if we can't find a way to implant the wrongness of what it is that people are doing, there's always going to be people who are going to ignore rules. I mean, without a doubt, there is no giant verbal net we can cast across the world that is going to ensnare everyone and turn them into automatons of infinite virtue. Like we have no capacity to do that, but we can convince, of course, hopefully we can convince a lot of people that being virtuous is both true and right and correct, and produces the Aristotelian goal of happiness and all that kind of stuff. So it is pretty significant. The if-then does kind of crack a lot of moral absolutes, and the God answer is not sufficient. So that's sort of what we're wrestling about. So a couple questions. Let's sort of get our definitions going on. So I think I know the answers to these from you, but I don't, of course, want to put my words in your mouth. So, does objective reality exist?
Yeah, I'm convinced of that proposition, definitely.
All right. What is the validity of reason?
What do you mean by the validity? Because if you're using a reason to justify reason, of course, you're begging the question. You can't really do it, but everyone does it anyway. It's a bit of a weird one.
Well, I'm not sure about that one. We can say, okay, but what is the value? I mean, you've got a channel called Rationality Rules. You obviously think that reason has value and purpose and some positive attribute to it. So what is the, well, I guess, what is the definition of reason and what is its value, if it has value?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to, because we're using your language for UPB, I'm actually happy to use whatever you feel most comfortable using. So really, I'm happy to use straight up whatever you want to use for these words.
But you have a thought yourself. I don't want to blanket the discussion myself. You must have thoughts about what reason is.
Yeah, no, of course. Like to quote you on page 10, you say, look, it's one of your ground rules. I respect your intelligence enough to refrain from defining words such as reality, reason, integrity, and so on. We have enough work to do without having to reinvent the wheel. So what I'm basically saying is that I'm happy and comfortable to use, like most people don't use rationality as the word, as it's defined in philosophy. They conflate it with reason and reality, etc. And that's not what rationality means. But it doesn't bother me, because since my goal is to try and have a conversation, I just meet people with what they mean. And since you've presented an argument, I'm happy just to like get down to what you think reason and rationality is. Because one of the weird things about philosophy, and I'm sure you've noted this yourself, is like so many words that we take for granted, such as should. Once you start questioning what it is, you get into the real woods. And one of the things we don't want to do, as you said about reinventing the wheel, is we don't want to get stuck too much in those definitions. But it's also necessary to do it to an extent. So I'll leave that up to you for what extent you want to do it.
Okay, so my answer as to the validity of reason is that reason is the art of non-contradictory identification. So reason is a way of saying something in our mind we want to map on to reality, because we don't want this solipsistic universe like, you know, Descartes' nightmare that we're a brain in a vat in a tank managed by some horrible demon, or I guess robots that are using us to be batteries or something like that, right? So reason is a way of validating,
mixing up a couple scenarios there,
whether the thoughts in our mind
I have
can
no idea how
potentially
these things are like
connect
related
with reality, because reality is objective and consistent. And listen, I know everybody gets dragged down to this quark, quantum mechanics, subatomic level, and that's all great for physicists. That's nothing to do with philosophy. I mean, there is a philosophy of science, don't get me wrong, but with regards to moral philosophy, all quantum mechanics, all quantum phenomena cancel out long before you get to sense data, long before you get to the moral realm that we inhabit, and so on. So we at the level of sense data, at the level of empiricism, from a philosophical and daily standpoint, without having electron microscopes and weird freaky stuff that's going on with gold leaves and simultaneous particle movements on the arse end of the universe and so on, at the level that we're going to talk about, the universe is stable, it is consistent, it is objective. I won't say that the universe is rational, because reason is a human construct, but it is a way of vetting our thoughts to find out if they can potentially map onto reality. In other words, reason is a necessary but not sufficient condition for figuring out whether our thoughts can represent reality. So, for instance, if I say, hey, Steve, let's spend the weekend looking for a square circle, we're not very likely to to come up with something, right? So you have used Bertrand Russell. It's a great example, like this teapot, right? That there could be a teapot orbiting somewhere around Mars that we can't see, and it's like, sure, I guess it's possible that some prior civilization developed teapots and lost one around Mars, Matt Damon style, or whatever it is. It certainly is possible. That's within the realm of possibility. But if we say Mars is a square circle, we don't have to go any further. Like, we don't have to go and examine the universe to try and figure out whether a square circle exists, because as a self-contradictory entity, we can just, wipe it out immediately, right? So yeah, there could be on some planet lizards that fly and breathe fire. Maybe they inhale methane and spark it up with some Indian food. I don't know, right? So we can't say dragons don't exist. We can't say unicorns don't exist, because somewhere, maybe in Middle Earth, somewhere on some other planet, there could be a horse with a horn on its head or whatever, right? So it's a way of vetting our thoughts to see where they could map on to reality. And if we have self-contradictory thoughts, it's something we need to iron out. Now, we can have self-contradictory thoughts if we're not trying to map them onto reality, and we do that every night when we dream, right? So we have these weird, impossible dreams where, you know, waterfalls turn into trees, turn into fire, and we can fly, and then we can breathe underwater. But we're not saying that's reality. We're saying that's a subjective, twitchy nighttime experience that
Those
trains us
things
to
aren't
deal with the
even
traumas of the day,
impossible, though.
sometimes it seems.
They're not.
So reason is the way that we have
Thanks,
our
other
first
Ethan.
vet of thoughts or ideas or arguments that could potentially apply to reality. Because what is the question of truth? Well, truth has to do with a mapping to reality, and that's how we differentiate it from subjective opinion, right? I may like guppies instead of goldfish as my favorite fish to have as a pet. That's a subjective opinion. But if I say guppies are mammals, I'm now taking a thought and I'm trying to map it into something that exists outside my mind, outside my subjective experience, outside the little prison planet we call a skull, so to speak. So once I'm taking my thoughts and I'm attempting to, in a sense, spray them or map them out to empirical reality, then I have to go through the first pass called, is it consistent? Is it rational? Does it hang together, so to speak, right? And this is why, you know, the arguments that you put forward, the syllogisms you put forward are all fantastic, right? Because they do train people to say, well, am I saying it's true because I can't believe that it's not true? Am I saying that it's true because it's popular? Am I, like, all of these things, they don't map onto things. If I say a guppy is warm-blooded and gives birth to live young and uses its mammary glands to make money off Twitch, uses its mammary glands to feed its young and has hair, well, then I'm just incorrect, right? So if I say that a guppy is both a reptile and a fish, a reptile and an amphibian and a fish and a mammal simultaneously, I've got contradictory entities, and so I don't need to go any further. And this is the way that science works, and this is the way philosophy should work. So science, you propose a hypothesis or a conjecture.
Wait, that's how science works?
First thing people do is say, does it contradict itself? If it does, you got to go back and start again. If it doesn't contradict itself, but it contradicts existing data, then you've still made a mistake, right? So reason to me is the first vetting, so to speak, of thoughts that we have that we're trying to map into an objective universe to see if they could potentially say something valid about what is.
I would say that I pretty much entirely agree with you, especially on the sense of, look, we can't say for sure that there's no teapot going around Jupiter. We can't say for sure that there's no God. We can't say for sure that there's no square circle, but for all intent and purposes, given the axioms that we assume, we can say that. We have to pull ourselves up by the bootstraps at some point. We can only make factual statements about what we have access to, and that's perfectly fine. That's perfectly reasonable. It's perfectly rational, because it's necessary, the situation we're in. So we're not making definitive statements. And I understand that quite a few people have had a criticism of you when it comes to you saying universal means you are saying that there's no teapot because you're talking universally. I just want to be clear that I'm not going to levy that criticism against you. I think it's true. I think it does hold, but I just think there's better ones to bring up. But you've had those debates, and other people can judge, right?
Now that's really interesting, because here's where you and I good. Now we're diverging. We get in the, it's funny, you know, like you get a Y when people diverge, and you also get a Y in philosophy, right? So here's where we're diverging, and I'm not just talking hairstyles, but so there were three things that you talked about there, two of which I'm with you, one of which I'm with you on, two of which I'm not. So you gave three examples. One was the teapot around Mars. It's unlikely, but it's not a self-contradictory entity, right? Because teapots exist, they can certainly orbit Mars, so it's unlikely, but it's not impossible, right? But then you provided two other things that I do consider positively not there, so to speak, which is a square circle and the traditional concept of a god. So those two situations are self-contradictory entities in a way that the teapot is not. So I wonder, I'm perfectly comfortable saying no square circles and no traditional god, but I'm not comfortable saying no teapot because it's not a self-contradictory entity. So I wonder if you can just tease that out for me.
I am totally fine to run on that, because that is what I'm convinced of. You can't have a square circle in the universe. Do I know this with certainty? No, unless we insist that the universe functions exactly as we experience it, which, considering that we used to make statements about the universe based on Newton's laws of gravity, and we were very confident, we called it a law, for crying out loud. And we were really like, it's universal, etc. And then what happened is E equals mc squared and general relativity. And all of a sudden, it wasn't universal. Well, actually, it was never universal. We shouldn't have been so arrogant as to have claimed that we know it's true in all places of the universe. And what I'm expressing is that the more I've learned, and I know that a lot of people have expressed this, Hitch did, for example, the more I learn how little I know. And it makes me very cautious of wanting to say definitive universal statements. But for the purpose of this, because I'm so close to, like, I call myself an atheist and I say that I know that there's no God. If you push me, I'll say, no, I don't know with certainty. I'm just, as sure as I am on so many other things. But that's a deep philosophical, necessarily epistemological hole that's just not worth going to. Because one of the things I like about your conversations, about your general method, is that let's just stay in the real world, as it were, as you put it, which is to say, let's work with what we've got. So no square circles. It's a contradiction. No. No.
That was something else.
It is. So I think it heard Stefan say that he's only willing to say that things don't exist if they're logically impossible. Which would be...
sounded like that. I mean, that honestly just sounded like, I mean, I think someone in the chat said like that kid in class who didn't do their homework and was called upon, definitely. Or like, I mean, also I'm right now in the middle of grading a bunch of essays, and like it just reminds me of like the meandering sentences that I get in essays from students who just like clearly didn't do the reading, and like,
yeah, that's fair. Okay, like, because that would be an insane thing to think that like you can only say that something doesn't exist if you can, it would be logically impossible for it to exist, since like, okay, so you can't, so like the ether, right? You can't say that doesn't exist because it's not logically impossible. I mean, like that's a really, it's an incredibly strange thing to say. I mean, or like, I don't know why Stefan thinks that the existence of God is logically impossible. It's not.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, it's definitely not. Like you could say like maybe if somebody gives an overly careless definition of what they mean by God, that like maybe they'll lead to like logical problems. But like anytime that's the case, right? I mean, you could just like slightly amend your definition, and it's no longer going to be if you say like, well, if you have some weird way of defining all powerful, then maybe you get the, like, was it what does Homer ask Ned Flanders, can Jesus microwave a burrito so hot that he himself could not eat it, but like, you could just be a little bit careful about explaining what you mean by all powerful, and you don't have that problem anymore, right? So like definitely the existence of something that we would all think of as God is not logically impossible. So if he wants to be an atheist, he clearly can't actually believe that you can only say things that don't exist if they're logically impossible. Also, why are we talking about this? Why has he spent like the last 20 minutes talking about this metaphysics stuff? Like, I thought this was supposed to be a debate about, the explaining ethics in terms of universally rational preferable behavior.
I mean, it is supposed to be that. And like, it's funny watching this. Like, I feel like I don't remember all this, and like there's a part of me that maybe remembers like skipping some of this stuff, because like nominally like we're still in like setting the groundwork, like because I think they're like having a like I kind of like the idea that they would like steelman each other. Like I think that's like a good way of like coming into debate. Like I thought that was a good idea, but it's like it just feels so over the top now, and like I don't know, I can't tell what Molyneux's goal, like if he actually thinks he's saying something smart, or if he's trying to like Gish Gallop to like delay the actual criticisms, because I think they sent each other their criticisms ahead of time. So like there's a part of me that wonders whether or not like he actually just doesn't want to get to the part where rationality rules actually comes in with like his critiques. But like so I saw some people in the chat being like, what is this debate about? And like like it's supposed to be about this ethical system, but they are still in like groundwork territory, which hopefully is over by now.
I mean, I'm sort of like, I mean, my main reaction is just like, I guess, confusion. Like, I feel like every time I'm starting, like, I think, okay, I'm starting to understand what Stefan is saying. he like, throws in a curveball that like throws me off again. Like when he's talking about possibility and he's like, Russell's teapot, not impossible. And I'm like, okay, I agree, not impossible.
Sure.
And then he's
So far,
like,
so good.
yeah. And then he's like, rainbows turning into waterfalls in your dreams. No, that's impossible. I'm
Why?
like, wait, which modality is that?
I
Like,
mean,
neither of them involve contradictions.
Yeah.
No, not at all. And like I'm not even sure. It's not worth going back and seeing exactly what it was,
No.
but I'm not even sure the Guppy example was that that's a contradiction there. There's certainly not with a rainbow turning into a waterfall. Like like you've described something that's like physically impossible, maybe, but like it doesn't. There's certainly nothing logically inconsistent about that. Like it's like the line from between like stuff that you can reasonably rule out and actually logically inconsistent, is just so ridiculously far. I think in a weird way this actually like offends me as much as all the like crazy fascist shit that Molyneux believes. Alan, thank you for the super chat. I'm not worried about America balkanizing. There are many dystopian things I'm worried about the United States, but I don't think that would be good for the capital accumulation blood wheel continuing to turn. So I don't think it's going to happen. All right. Any other? Well, I guess we should just forge ahead and see if they actually get to the.
I like Replicator's comment there. I think he's right that Woodford is trying to execute like exactly an encirclement maneuver. So kind of just like agreeing until like all is being like, yes, I agree with you about that. Like, let's get to the which hopefully we'll get to now.
Yes, and also, by the way, Schmegley is absolutely right. The whole point that Russell is making with the teapot example is precisely that you can reasonably say it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Right? The Russell's bringing up the teapot precisely to make the point that something doesn't have to be logically impossible for it to be like reasonable to say no, we're pretty sure that doesn't exist. But anyway.
Yeah.
All right.
God, it's a contradiction. The attributes.
Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure we weren't casting too wide a net there. So we've talked about objective reality. We've talked about reason. Now, of course, the question is truth. And I'm happy to have you talk about that. I don't mind jawboning, as I never do, but I don't want to overshare, so to speak. So what are your thoughts on the question of what is truth?
It's just basically, does it accurately represent reality, those things that are external to us? And we have at least two ways of looking at it. One of it is that we make factual statements. It is a fact that the Earth is a sphere, for example. This is relating to reality, as it were. And the second one is that we try and describe the way in which the universe works. So we have Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection. We're now smart enough to call it a theory because, again, we don't want to make universal statements, but it's a damn strong one. And colloquially speaking, it's a fact. So I would put reality in the sense of, or our relationship with reality is very much, truth, as it were, is our understanding of what actually is, if that makes sense.
Okay, so I think it's the label that we apply to. I mean, the gold standard of truth is that it is rationally consistent, logically consistent, and also maps onto reality. Now, of course, in the realm of physics, it's got to map on 100%. Like as you point out, you start missing stuff with Newton, which you start to do closer to the speed of light and all that kind of stuff, right? So when you start missing stuff in physics, that's bad. You can't get the same thing in weather forecasting. You can't get the same thing in looking at human events. But if you have a consistent theory, a theory consistent with itself, and it also happens to map onto and explain larger movements of human history, why is it that central planning in governments tends to fail? Why is it that the free market has been so productive? Why is wage labor generally more productive than slavery? Like all of these are interesting questions. If you have a theory that is internally consistent and does a lot to explain most of that, that's about as gold standard as you can get. So to me, truth is the relationship between logical consistency, which is necessary but not sufficient, and then the gold standard of also applies in the world in a consistent, predictable way. And you know, like, I mean, for like, I don't know, like 15 years, I've been talking about the dangers of increased leftist violence and racial conflict and all of this. And,
is he
you know,
implying that a claim could correspond to the world but not be consistent?
Yeah, that's this is the weirdest definition of truth ever, that truth means that things are logically consistent and they have all of these like epistemic virtues that make it reasonable to believe in. It's like, this is all part of how you're defining true.
Yeah.
Right? Like this, there's no such thing as like just like a lucky guess where you say something you don't know but it's still true. That would be really surprising, but whatever. Okay.
I mean,
you know, if it turns out,
it's kind of weird because I mean, I guess it just seems like when philosophers or scientists are talking about theoretical virtues, like it's couched in terms of the fact that this theory has all these virtues makes it likely that the theory is true. What it means for the theory to be true.
Yeah. It'd be such a weird, right? Exactly. That is how people normally think about it. It'd be incredibly weird to reverse that, to say that something could only count as true if it has all these features that make it likely to be true. I mean, it's it is just the weirdest. Like, I don't understand. Like, see, this is. I mean, I understand, and I'm given the, you know, based on what Victor said earlier, I'm giving the rationality rules guy the benefit of the doubt, and I do understand. Like, I actually think there's like great virtue in picking your battles and like not like challenging random things because you know, you have a particular goal and, you know, you want to keep your eye on the prize and, you know, have some message discipline. These are all good things. But I so badly want him to just be like, well, wait, that's all part of what it means to be true? Like, you really believe that?
Yeah. Yeah, I know. It's tough. It's tougher to watch than I remembered it being before with all these. Yeah, it's over the top almost. And like, yeah, Stefan Molyneux, like he does just so strongly come across as like trying to say things in like the most like overly like pseudo sophisticated like manner possible. And like, I guess I'm just more, I mean, it's been a while since I've watched him, but like I'm more realizing now like how much his rhetoric and like I guess the followers he got might like depend on just seeming like he's got these really like this sophisticated knowledge. So yeah, it's kind of jarring, more jarring than I remembered.
Yeah, I would do want to say though that like this is not intentional, but I really love the moment that we paused on there.
That you're right, that at least tells people that your theory has some potential merit. So that's, I think, where truth, you know, logical consistency maps onto reality as best as we can tell. That's about as high a bar as we can
maps
set.
Onto reality.
So the next one is, and I guess here's where we start to hear a click of the potential minefield. So we got objective reality, we got reason, we got truth. Look at that, we did that in just a blink of an eye. What premises are implicitly accepted when debating?
Now, this is fantastic. And I think this is where we're going to really get to the heart of it. If you wouldn't mind, I'd actually like to present where I think you equivocate, because I think it will relate to.
Wait, you're saying I haven't done it yet?
No, I'm saying, yeah, right. My bad. Yeah, if I could put on the table the claim of equivocation, because basically I think there's about 16, 17 flaws with UPB, and particularly there's 4 of them which are game ending, as it were.
Wow. So if the flaws in UPB are years, it can almost vote. That's great. A couple more and it can drink in the States. Anyway, go on.
Yeah, well, in the UK, it's already free to do a few of those things, so that's all good. No, basically, in this conversation, if you're up for it, I'd like to give you about 3 or 4 of my favorite ones, and they're not necessarily mine. They are like.
I'm so sorry. I hate to interrupt you. I really do. I do want to get into the UPB stuff for sure, but. And we can decide not to do what premises are implicitly accepted when debating. Because if we can agree on those, then I think we're a long way towards maybe narrowing down where the major differences are.
We can take that pathway first if you like. The only reason I'm interjecting here is I think that you'll understand my critique a little better if we do it beforehand. But I'm happy to go.
No, it's if you want to do it that way, that's totally fine with me.
Okay, cool, man. I appreciate that fact. But we will definitely go through those because I think that's where the heart of our disagreement is probably going to be, because that's where Hume resides, as it were. So I was wondering if you could explain to the audience the concept of an equivocation fallacy.
I'll let you take that. I'll let you
Sure
take
thing,
that
no
bullet.
problem. Yeah, sure thing. So an equivocation fallacy occurs when a word or a term with two or more different meanings is used in multiple senses in an argument. So to give like a classical example, premise one, laws are created by an intelligent agent. Premise two, there are laws in the universe. Conclusion, therefore, an intelligent agent, God, created the laws of the universe. The reason why that is an equivocation fallacy is that they've used two different definitions of the word laws throughout their premises to get to their conclusion. So what I'd like to present is essentially where I think that you have two, perhaps three definitions of UPB in your book. And once I've got all of that on the table, would you be okay with me doing that and then giving the floor to you to respond? Because one of the notorious things about equivocation fallacies when you're trying to present them is the other person wants to interject a lot, which is understandable. But would you allow me to get that on the table?
I'll be quiet till you tell me not to. That's totally fine with me.
Thanks, man. The floor is all yours afterwards. So,
yeah.
The first definition that you give of universal preferences is on page 33. And you say, quote, preferences are central to any methodology claiming to define the truth values of propositions. The scientific method, for instance, is largely defined by innate preferences for logical consistency and empirical verification. For science, the premise is, if you want to determine a valid truth of the behavior of matter and energy, it is preferable that you use the scientific method. In this sense, preferable does not mean sort of better, but rather required. And then you give some examples. Quote, if you want to live, it is universally preferable that you refrain from eating a handful of arsenic. If you wish to determine valid truths about reality, it is universally preferable that your theories be both internally consistent and empirically verifiable. Universally preferable then translates to objectively required. I'm just going to give that one more time just because I think it's really important. Universally preferable then translates to objectively required. So here you've given a clear definition of something that's universally preferable. That is objectively required or necessary. If you wish to live, it is objectively required that you refrain from eating a handful of arsenic. Now, before I move to your second definition, what I want to do is put on a flag here for everybody. Note that this definition is descriptive as opposed to prescriptive. You're not saying that someone should or ought to refrain from eating a handful of arsenic, but rather merely stating that if you want to live, it is objectively required that you don't eat a handful of arsenic.
We can all, of course, sorry to interrupt, but we can all think of situations where somebody would choose to eat a handful of arsenic because they have some other value.
So when Stefan said he was going to shut up until he was told not to, that was what, like 45 seconds ago?
I know. They went through like so much of this like rigmarole, like please don't interrupt me, you can talk as much as you want afterwards. And then like 50 seconds and
he can't help himself.
Maybe they've been captured by the bad guys and they don't want to give up the goods, or maybe they have some terrible ailment that it can't be cured. So yeah, I mean, there are certainly situations wherein, while we may have issues with it, we could certainly understand the motivation.
Absolutely, yeah. So again, you're simply making a descriptive factual is statement as opposed to a prescriptive should ought statement. You're just pointing out, look, if you want to live, then don't eat a handful of arsenic. But on the very next page, you switch from asserting about what is the case to asserting what ought to be the case. Quote, thus, when I talk about universal preferences, I am talking about what people should prefer, not what they always do prefer. To use a scientific analogy, to truly understand the universe, people should use the scientific method. Critically, unlike the first definition you gave on the page before, which operates explicitly in the realm of descriptive factual is statements, by using the term should on this page, you're now explicitly in the realm of prescriptive normative ought statements. With your first definition, your statement of, if you want to live, it is objectively required that you refrain from eating a handful of arsenic, you are merely describing what is objectively required to achieve a goal. Whereas with your second definition of your statement, you're saying, if you want to live, you should refrain from eating a handful of arsenic. With you doing the second, you are now prescribing what someone ought to do given their goal. Just little bit more
I'm not. They seem to me both in the realm of if then, right? If you want to live, don't eat arsenic, and if you want to say something true about the universe, use the scientific method.
Sure. So we can get rid of the first definition now, I guess. So when you say, I'll go back up. When you say, quote, universally preferable, then translates to objectively required. By objectively required, you are implicitly saying that they should do it or should not do it. Is that correct? If we're just using
assuming a particular goal, yeah.
So you're not describing it is assuming a particular goal. It's a Kantian hypothetical at this point.
No, but I'm talking about science, and I already said if you want to say something true. I mean, you understand the book can be labored if I put the if-then statement in every conceivable time I'm talking about it. I mean, I've been talking about science as a category, right?
Yeah, no, I'm absolutely happy with that fact. And, I'm sure you appreciate the term objectively required doesn't necessarily seem prescriptive, but you don't want to keep repeating the same words. I get that. So we can write the first definition off. So you've got the second, which is the hypothetical imperatives. But then on page 54, for example, and this is the one you actually use more often, you implicitly give a third definition of UPB. You say, quote, UPB is an all or nothing framework. If an action is universally preferable, then it cannot be limited by individual, geography, time, etc. If it is wrong to murder in Algiers, then it is also wrong to murder in Belgium, the United States, at the North Pole, and on the moon. If it is wrong to murder yesterday, then it cannot be right to murder tomorrow. If it is wrong for Bob to murder, then it must also be wrong for Doug to murder. Now, this non-contingent, non-hypothetical, non-goal-based moral statement is indeed the holy grail of philosophy. Why? Because it's truly universal. It's akin to saying, without any if clause, do not eat a handful of arsenic. Crucially, this is the beast that you claim to have slain throughout your work. This is the head that you've claimed to decapitated. And so I would say that whether you've meant to or not, you have used multiple definitions of UPB. Which
well, hang on. I'm saying if repeatedly in the sentence. So of course it's an if clause. If it is wrong, like if I can prove that it's wrong to murder, or if murder is wrong, then it has to be wrong for everyone, because it's a category that encapsulates human action, which means that if you're going to define humanity as carbon-based, hairless ape, biped, or whatever it is, like if you're going to define humanity as that, then it's almost like a tautology, but it's worth reminding people of this. Like if you're going to claim something is true for all human beings, then it has to be true for all human beings. And if morality is something, if we can prove that murder is wrong, then clearly it has to be wrong for everyone. It can't be right or wrong based upon the day of the week or your physical location, in the same way that a biologist wouldn't say, well, this thing is a lizard in Australia. At the moment you move it to New Zealand, it becomes a mammal. Like that would, well, no, that's not how biology works. It's independent of place. So I've got a lot of if statements in there. If murder is wrong, then it has to be wrong for everyone, because murder would be a human action that would be consistent across all humanity. And if you're going to define something as consistent across all humanity, it has to be independent of time and place.
Okay, so clarify that with the example that was being given. I'll just find it in my notes again. So you said, look, if it is wrong for Bob to murder, then it must also be wrong for Doug to murder. So if we was to say, look, Bob has a preference for murdering, the reason being is that he's in a camp and he's had enough and he just wants to, be done with it, as it were.
Sorry, what do you mean by in a camp?
In a camp. Let's just say that he's under a certain amount of duress, that he's in a Nazi camp or whatever.
Oh, then it's not a moral situation.
So not a moral situation.
No, this is like you had this. I actually got really pissed off when I watched that video of yours, because I thought you were portraying me as a Nazi, because you had that scene from Inglourious Bastards. Because you were indicating that my philosophy, if taken to its logical conclusion, would have you giving up Jews to Nazis. And I've been real clear about that once you have a gun pointed to your head, you're no longer in a...
Okay, so something is wrong. It has to be wrong at all times, in all places, for everybody, on all planets, etc. Unless you're in not a moral situation.
Yeah, I mean, well, the claim also just seems so, just once we've disambiguated it, it just seems like uninteresting. Like if I say murder is wrong, and I mean by that it's always wrong to murder, then obviously it's always wrong to murder. But if I say murder is wrong, and I have some other notion in mind, it's wrong to murder right now, or it's wrong to murder in this context or whatever, then it doesn't follow that murder is always wrong. So it's like, I mean, sure, it's like either we're saying it's always wrong or we're not. And if we're saying it's always wrong, then it's entailed that it's always wrong. But like, I guess I'm not seeing like that he hasn't proven that saying it's sometimes wrong is like incoherent. You know,
Right,
he's just
right,
proved
right.
that if we mean it's always wrong, then we mean it's always wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, that seems right. I think this is a really weird thing that he does. This is actually coming back to me that in the from the debate that I did with him and like research leading up to that, because he has like this is the move that he wants to make, that like when you come up with a scenario where it would obviously be right to do something that he says is always wrong, he just says, well, now you're in a special no morality zone. It's like, well, and like I tried to, I sort of did it very briefly and then like kind of decided it wasn't really worth it, but I did try to push down this exact point when I debated him, because it's like, well, wait, you don't actually believe that, right? Like that, like just because you're like under some situation of duress, you're defending yourself, whatever, that means that you're really in a no morality zone, because like that would mean that anything you did in that situation would be okay, and you don't believe that. Nobody believes that, right? I
Yeah,
mean, like
exactly.
if the guy in the Nazi camp, right? I mean, like, yeah, sure. You know, we might think that like there are lots of things that he might do in that scenario that would normally be wrong. Sure. You know, like he could kill a guard, whatever. But like, there are lots of things that you could do in a death camp that we still think are wrong, right? Like you're not like, if you could be you could like, you know, turn in some other inmates who are planning to escape because you think that's going to like go a little bit better for you and you'll get extra privileges. Like if we were really in a no morality zone, that would be okay, right? But I mean, I assume that Stefan doesn't actually think that.
No, I don't think so either. Yeah, and he obviously has, I don't think he has any way of like disambiguating what's a moral situation, what's not. And I think people in the chat have been noticing too that like clearly like what he's left with, I guess, which I think is the point that that rationality rules is trying to get to, that then like otherwise he's just got like a bunch of hypothetical imperatives, right? He doesn't have like anything universal, because it's all conditional, right? It's not at all universal.
Yeah, that seems like right. That seems like what the rationality rules guy is getting at. That you have that. In fact, I will say, like, I've been a little frustrated because like so much of what we've watched so far is just like Stefan babbling and saying things that sort of make sense or maybe are just completely wrong, and Stephen saying,
Yeah.
"Oh yeah, no, that's right, sure." You know, but like I will say that that what he said just now was actually really good. You know, he was like, "Well, hold on though, right? Because all you actually seem to be saying is like all you're actually giving us are a bunch of hypothetical imperatives. If you have some goal, here's the thing you should do, and
Yeah.
fine. That's not what you're claiming to deliver."
Yeah, he's
Right?
claiming
Like,
to deliver the holy grail of philosophy, to dramatically chop the head off of this beast.
yeah, he's saying he's going to give like objective morality, that, you know, murder is wrong, not it's wrong if you have such and such goal, but you know, but you're gonna, it's just wrong, and that's going to be based on, it's going to be purely naturalistic because it's just all going to be based on, you know, you're being inconsistent somehow if you don't say it, you know, which obviously he's not delivering. But anyway, all right, let's get back to this
moral situation, and we all understand that, right? So if you go and take a hostage and then you force that hostage to go and rob a bank, then you're prosecuted, but your hostage is not, because your hostage is under duress. So morality applies to situations of choice, and if you have a gun to your head, you're no longer in a situation of choice. And so when you put someone in a camp, or if someone comes and says, do you have Anne Frank in your attic? Of course you would say no. You're not in a situation of moral obligation. If you're going to bring morality to that situation, you would bring it to the Nazi or the person taking the hostage, not to the victim.
Okay, so it seems to me that I would make a Kantian hypothetical imperative. I would say, look, If you want to be liked, then, you know, don't lie. But when you're in a situation where, you know, there's a gun at your face and you've got to give away someone that's under your table, I'd say, look, man, if you want to live, you ought to give them away. There's no inconsistencies here. This is just Kant's hypothetical imperative.
But that's just making up rules, right? I mean, there's no philosophy in that. You're just saying, hey, if you want to do this, then you want to do that. I mean, that's not a universal morality. That's just how you might act in a particular situation.
It's not just what you would do in a certain situation. It's a prescription given someone's goal. So you're right. It's not universal. But it seems to me that if you're suggesting that for some people the action of murder can be justified, because you say if an action is universally preferable, then it cannot be limited by individual geography time. But we could limit it by individual by saying, look, this guy is in a situation where murder is, you know, something that's preferable towards his goals.
No, murder can't. No, hang on. So murder can't be universally preferable behavior because murder is unwanted, right? So you can't say everyone should both murder and want to be murdered at the same time. Well, first of all, everybody would die and there'd be no morality. So you can't, right? Because everybody would kill and be killed in some weird circle jerk Mexican standoff Tarantino moment or something like that. So if you were to say murder is universally preferable behavior, then there'd be no people. But even if we were to accept that somehow people could survive, murder is asymmetric, of course, in the way that rape and theft and assault are. In other words, murder has to be unwanted behavior. So we can talk about euthanasia and the ethics and all of that. But if you want someone to kill you, then that's not the same as murder. Murder is the unlawful, I mean, technically in the law, it's called the unlawful killing of another human being. It's not just ending someone's life. You can do that in self-defense and be perfectly justified. So no, murder cannot ever be used.
Wait, so if it's perfectly justified, should that mean by what you just said that everybody wants to be killed in self-defense? I mean, why is that? Why is that okay? Right? I mean, if the explanation for why murder can't be right is that then you wouldn't then, you know, like if everybody wanted it, that would mean everybody wanted to be murdered, to both murder and be murdered. That should killing in self-defense is okay. I mean that, you know, that everybody wants to both kill in self-defense and be killed in self-defense.
Yeah, presumably.
Okay.
UPB, which doesn't mean you can't kill in self-defense. I've got a whole argument for self-defense, which we can go into another time. But murder is very, very specific, and murder can't be UPB because it has to be unwanted.
Yes, I understand that it's the murder aspect. It's more that you can prescribe something to one person given their goal and prescribe something completely different to someone else given their goal. And it seems to me that if you want a universal...
I don't follow that. Sorry. Do you mean I'm doing that?
No. I'm saying
it's
that
kind of funny how
so that's a Kant's hypothetical.
Stefan is like not even trying to not sound ad hoc when he's like giving these qualifications. Like he doesn't try to like give some independent motivation for the qualifications. He's just like, oh no, that's a special no morality zone, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Imperative. And when you're introducing if clauses, then you are in the realm of Kant's hypothetical imperatives, because you're saying, look, you should do this if you want this, if you have this goal. Whereas a universal morality would necessarily have to just be, thou shalt not murder, don't murder. This seems to be the thing that you were promising. Whereas
Wait, are you that the entire UP is a regurgitation of one of the 10 commandments? Come on. No,
man. If I was going to say it's a regurgitation, I'd say it's Kant's hypothetical imperative more so than anything else. And the reason I say that is because you add these if clauses. You say, if you want to understand X, you ought to do Y. And the good news, of course, is I have no problem with that. And your peers, you know, philosophers in general don't have a problem with that. But it's not the holy grail of philosophy. Like, it's not the thing that we're looking for.
Can theft be universally preferable behavior logically?
And by theft being universally preferable, do you mean someone wants to be stolen from and steal at the same time?
Well, you can't. Well, yes. Can everyone want to steal and be stolen from at the same time?
No.
Okay, so that's good, right? So theft can't be universally preferable behavior.
Yeah, but all you've just done is described a fact. You've described a contradiction. You've basically just said, look, square circles are impossible, therefore morality. That's not morality.
You just said that theft can't be universally preferable behavior.
Because you're defining
anybody who claims that there's any value in universally preferable behavior has to then submit to the strictures of universally preferable behavior. In the same way that you can, like, science is not a buffet. Like, you say, okay, well, there's a scientific method for this, but not for that. Like, it's just the way that it is. So the real issue, of course, where you and I part ways, is that you reject the self-detonation of the argument. There's no such thing as universally preferable behavior, as far as I understand it.
No. It's the problem, and this is why I'm focusing on the equivocation, is the way in which we define universally preferable behavior. Because if we just say, look, man, a square circle is impossible, I agree. If we say a married bachelor is impossible, I agree. If we say that you can't want to be murdered, I agree. If we say we can't want to be stolen from, I agree. These are all descriptive statements. None of this is in the realm of morality. It's not even hypotheticals imperative. Like, to go to the analogy, you haven't even got out of bed. You're intellectually masturbating.
Wait, so
and not
you're saying
going out
that
the beast.
So you're saying that an argument that says rape, theft, assault, and murder can't be universally preferable behavior, that if you accept universally preferable behavior as a standard, and I argue that even to engage in a debate is to accept it as a standard, that if you accept universally preferable behavior as a standard, you must reject rape, theft, assault, and murder. You're saying rape, theft, assault, and murder have nothing to do with morality?
Wait, you can't have a debate without accepting universally preferable behavior?
Apparently. I think he thinks of it, if I recall, as like by entering, like, you accept that, like, there's going to be some sort of, like, I guess, intersubjective back and forth, that, like, you are assuming that they exist. Or I don't remember exactly the details, but it's something he does somehow think that that's accepting UPB.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I finally, like, I was like struggling to see what he was getting at, but now I'm kind of starting to realize, like, it feels like he just kind of like took argumentation ethics and made it like weirder and like changed it in a couple places, and like that's what he's going with. Like, I think he's probably going to try and do some sort of, like, in order to engage in a debate, you have to implicitly, like, value truth, or you have to implicitly value, like, engagement of ideas rather than violence or something.
And since the only way we can possibly make sense of why engagement with ideas is better than violence is by accepting Stefan Molyneux's moral theory.
Yeah,
Apparently.
yeah, or like just like the implicit acceptance of non-violence as morally preferable that we accept when we engage in a debate, like, necessarily leads to his moral theory or something like that. I think that might be what he's going to try to do.
To debate, it's universally preferable behavior to not interrupt others, and I feel like he's violating that all the time.
Yeah, right. After and also breaking his promise not to.
Exactly.
Yeah, I just, like, it's just such a weird, like, what Stefan is doing right now is just such a weird way to argue, because, like, you could just as easily say, like, you could just give a bunch of examples of things that seem like they probably lead to bad consequences and, like, demand to know whether the other person believes that those would lead to bad consequences, and be like, okay, so you accept utilitarianism. Like, you know, it's like, no, I don't accept utilitarianism. Well, you just said these things lead to bad consequences.
Right.
Are you saying that rape and murder and theft have nothing to do with morality? It's like, yeah, you have a bunch of, like, any moral theory that anybody comes up with is going to give you the result that, like, rape and murder and theft are bad, right? Like, that's not where they're going to come apart. So it's like, just saying, like, my theory predicts that these things will be bad, and you agree that they're bad, and so therefore you should accept my theory, like that.
Yeah. And I mean, maybe one of the things he's getting at is, like, okay, well, if you're going to debate me, then you have to implicitly admit that, like, truth is valuable.
Mhm.
And so that's at least one, like, behavior that's universally preferable. And then maybe he's going to try and show that there are others. I have no idea. It's very confusing to me.
Okay.
Sophistry in action.
I don't know if it's sophistry or if it's just, like, I kind of get, like, I guess while I was watching this, I was thinking that I had to like revise at least one of my beliefs, which is that previously I had thought that in terms of just babbling and like jargon and saying absolutely nothing, that my prior belief was that like James Lindsay is just like on a level of his own. But like after watching this, I'm starting to think like, okay, maybe there's like some competition.
No, of course you have something to do with morality, but what you're describing now as UPB is anything that is self-contradictory or self-detonating, as you describe it.
No,
which is why
no. There are we just went through this earlier, man. When there are scientific theories that are self-contradictory, which you toss out, they don't have anything to do with morality.
Yeah, I know, but you're saying that if it's so you have UPB. One of the best ways I think we can go through this is actually what you suggested earlier, because I think with this now on the table, it would be a good time to do it. And that is, we can go through the implicit assumptions that we do make when we have a debate, and we can identify which of those we would call UPB and which definition.
Well, yeah, that's why I wanted to do it first, because that way we can bypass a lot of this confusion. So, okay, what are the premises that are implicit? I'm sorry.
Just sorry to interrupt, but what my whole point was that now that we're going to get into them and these definitions have been put on the table, I think it's going to be more fruitful. I understand if you don't think that that's the...
No, that's fine. Hey, I'm really enjoying the discussion. I appreciate it. And look at that. We have thousands of people watching us at the same time. Wait, how's my hair? Check my armpit. All right. So premises that are implicitly accepted when debating. I'm going to do just a tiny little bit here just to sort of understand that, right? So I'm going to use a tiny analogy because I think analogies can be helpful. They're not proof, but they're very illuminating, right? So let's say that Steve and I decide, let's pretend it wasn't coronavirus and America's not currently on fire. We decide we want to get on a bus and go to Vegas, right? And so we go down to the bus station. We say we want 2 tickets for a bus to Vegas. We get on that bus and then we go to Vegas, right? Now, Vegas is the truth. In this analogy, right? We both have a destination that we say we want to get some particular place. And both Steve and myself, we both agree that objective reality exists, that reason is of value, empiricism is of value, the truth is of value. If you're going to claim something true about the universe, it should be rational, consistent with evidence and all that. So we both decide to get on a bus to go to Vegas. We both voluntarily agree to get on that bus to go to Vegas. So that to me is the analogy of a debate. We both say that we want the truth, and that the truth is not something subjective, right? So we can't just sit there and say, if the bus gets hijacked and goes to, I don't know, San Francisco instead of Vegas, we don't sit there and say, hey, we got to Vegas, right? I mean, I guess they both look the same because they're on fire, but ideally, again, that wouldn't be the case, right? And now also, if Steve and I both get on a bus to go to Vegas, there's a better and worse way to get to Vegas. Now, there's no objective better and worse way to get around if we don't have a destination, right? There's no lines on the road that force like a train, like the bus to go in a particular direction. But once we've decided to go to Vegas, there are better and worse ways to go to Vegas, right? Like if we're in Detroit and we drive north, we're going the opposite way from going to Vegas. Unless we have a whole lot of snowshoes on the car, we ain't getting there, right? So once we have a goal that we both agree on, then there's better and worse ways to get there. Now we can change our goal. Of course, we can say, I don't want to go to Vegas, but as long as we both say we want to get to Vegas, then we're both kind of bound by the laws of physics, reality, and travel and all of that to get to a particular place. So my argument is to say, look, if you and I are going to start engaging in a debate that's not just a conversation about personal preferences. Like the other night, people got me started talking about music. And I mean, I love music. And I was talking all about my particular tastes and getting feedback. This is just a taste thing. You know, like, again, it's the guppies versus goldfish thing. If I like guppies and you like goldfish, you know, we can have a discussion about owning fish or whatever, but it's not like some objective metric, right? We're then basically talking about cities we've liked to have visited in the past, rather than a city that we're objectively going to in the present. So what I'm saying is, getting into a debate with someone is like saying, okay, we're both getting on this bus and we're going to Vegas. Now we are part of an objective process, an objective structure, because we both have a goal called getting to Vegas that has an objective destination, that has an objective methodology for getting there. And now we can start to talk about better and worse. Now the better and worse doesn't exist if we don't both agree to get on that bus and go somewhere. So and that's to me the is-ought dichotomy. How do you break the is-ought dichotomy? Ought people to go to Vegas? I don't know. It's a fun place, don't get me wrong. But ought people to go to Vegas? That's not really a very sensible thing to say, right? Because there's no universally preferable behavior called go to Vegas, right? But once we both decide we're going to go to Vegas, now we got better and worse. Now we've got accurate and inaccurate. Now we've got value and the opposite of a value, right? So Vegas is the truth. We've got to now get a name for the title for the show, right? Vegas is truth, baby. It's truth. And so that's sort of my argument about getting involved in debates, that we're both trying to do this thing called get to the truth. And there's now objective methodologies by which we can pursue that. But if you and I get, last thing I'll say, this is you and I get on a bus, we're going to Vegas, and then you turn to me or I turn to you and we say, well, there's no better or worse way to get to Vegas. It's like, okay, come on. We have no purpose on this trip. Like once you're getting in the bus and going to Vegas, there's a whole bunch of stuff that you have to kind of accept, as long as your goal is still Vegas. And so since our goal remains the truth, there's stuff that's implicit. That's what we're, I think, trying to sort of unpack here.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would touch on that is you said a lot of if, and I know it's deliberate, of course. You're saying if we have the goal, Hume wouldn't have any problem with you saying, look, if we want to get to Vegas, we ought to take this route. If our goal is to get there as quick as possible, we ought to take this route. You would have no issue, but that isn't bridging the is-ought gap.
Well, I think it is, and that's, of course, where our big difference lies. So go for it. What premises are implicitly accepted when debating?
Sure. So one of them would be that language has meaning. Because I can't communicate that to you, of course, or at least I can't, well, actually I can't in any way, but don't believe. I can't communicate that to you without, well, using language. It's a self-detonating, self-contradictory statement.
If you can use language to convey that language has no meaning, language has meaning. Okay, yeah, I'm with you there.
Yeah, so we both agree with this. We could use your analogy. We could say, you know what? That's the wheels of the bus.
Now that song's in my head. Oh, I've been a stay-at-home dad for too long. All right. Language has meaning. Yep, we accept that.
So would you call what we just described, would you call that UPB?
I would say that to deny that language has meaning would remove you from the debate.
I agree with that, but would you call, because you go, boom, UPB right there. Boom, like, is that a boom? Is that a UPB?
I'm not sure what you mean. It's not a moral
So when someone tries to correct you, they go through these implicit premises. I'm wondering which of these implicit premises are the ones where you say, boom, you're doing UPB there. You're enacting, you are using UPB to state to me that there is no such thing as UPB. I'm asking is, would language be, with it being a contradiction for me to tell you that language doesn't convey meaning, is that a UPB?
Well, no, that's, I mean, yeah, that's a great question. Sorry, it took me a little while to sink that through my scalp. So I get the question. So what I would say is that self-contradictory statements are false. And so if you're saying to me language has no meaning, then I would say, well, you've just contradicted yourself, because you're using language, the meaning of language, to convey that language has no meaning. Yeah, so I would say that's a false statement, and you could say it's universally preferable behavior to make consistent statements if you wish to be honest, if you wish to be accurate, let's say, right?
Do you think someone's necessarily doing it if they just say language, you can't, if they accept that that's a contradiction, have they necessarily enacted a UPB there? Like, could someone not do it?
Now, so UPB is one of these things, and I want to just be clear about this. I sort of clarified this more in my new book on UPB called Essential Philosophy. So UPB is one of these things that's, it's two things, you know, and it's sort of like science, right? So science is two things. It's the theory and the practice, right? So that's the scientific method.
Sorry, I promise I'll let you continue. Apologies. Yeah. I know it's rude, but if you're saying that UPB is two things, then you've kind of proven my point with equivocation fallacy.
No, not at all. No, not at all. Okay. I mean, science is two things, right?
You can redefine it in different ways, but
no. Science is the theory and practice of science. There's the scientific method, which is not science directly. And then there's the practice of enacting theories and experiments and reproducibility within or under the umbrella of the scientific method.
So just to clarify that point, I'd say you just gave things. You gave science and then scientific method. They're different things. They have different definitions. There's no problem there. Whereas
no,
other
but they're
things,
both under the umbrella of science, right?
Science is two things, one of which isn't science.
Then, you know, if we're using one definition, to be clear on what a preference is, and
no, but
we use
okay,
something.
so no, I get that. So there's UPB, which is just around self-contradictions are invalid, right? Or things that contradict empirical evidence are invalid. So that's UPB. And then there's UPB, which is used to evaluate moral propositions. And so, and that's very clear in the book. I mean, I know it's not super clear. That's why I've sort of written a thing to clarify it more. It's one of these things that when you sit with the idea for so long, it becomes clear to you, it's a little clear to others sometimes.
In your book, you find it as anything that's not to do with preference, with people per se. You just called it aesthetics, and you called it if it's to do with people preferences. You discarded it in reference to just facts in general. You necessarily made it part of morality.
Well, no, because it's universally preferable behavior, which we talked about earlier, that our statements be internally consistent and consistent with empirical reality.
Okay, so I guess we can go through those implicit assumptions a little further to bury them out from there so that we can figure out which one's UPB. I'll let you continue. I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to clarify a few things.
Okay, so language has meaning. I mean, objective reality plus the other person has to exist.
Yep. So yeah, I got these down. Yep. When you say that, when I assume that you exist, which is necessary for me to have a conversation with you, is that UPB?
Well, it is not UPB to say that self-contradictory statements are valid.
Sure. I say I'm communicating with you and that you don't exist, and I'm contradicting myself, right?
Yes.
So is a UPB.
Well, it's a UPB violation to claim that self-contradictions are valid in reality.
Okay, so you would say, so we've got language down, and we've got the other person existing.
The senses are valid.
Or at least as accurate as we can get. You know, we caveated earlier, but
yeah,
you know, let's just be honest. Fuck that crap. We get straight to the business.
Oh, listen, we've all had those conversations where you're in a hot debate with someone, and and you try and reassemble it so as not to break the flow. But yeah, the senses are valid, right? Valid enough. It's like saying, you know, language has meaning. It doesn't mean it's perfect, which is why we kind of work on these definitions, right? But yeah, language has the capacity for meaning. Objective reality exists. The other person exists. The senses are valid. And accuracy is preferable to error.
So these are necessary assumptions that we make during debate. So when it comes to the language one, of course, I've made that assumption. I would say it's a factual statement that I've assumed, and that is that language has meaning. When it comes to assuming that you exist, I've made that assumption. Again, we're nowhere in the realm of morality here. This is a descriptive statement about I've assumed that you exist. With validity and whatnot. So we both assume that we're playing by the game of rationality. We both assume the laws of logic, for example. So there we go. We're playing by that. I agree with you. I don't see any should here whatsoever. I'm just wondering if you could tease to me where the should is, because I don't think
you don't see any
should.
shoulds. Sorry,
Not
I don't
sure.
mean that's incredulity, which is, I'm sorry, let me be clear. So if someone says, I want to debate with you, but I don't believe that you exist, that's a self-contradictory statement, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
Self-contradictory.
So I'm not going to debate with somebody who won't accept that that's a self-contradictory statement because they're not in the realm of reality and they can't achieve truth.
Yeah, basically you're saying, are we going to accept these rules, these factual descriptive rules, in order to have conduct? Yeah, and I'm accepting these rules.
Okay, so there's your should.
So where's the should?
The should is I'm not going to. The should is I'm not going to participate in a debate with someone who doesn't believe that I exist and language has no meaning. And the reason for that is that if they genuinely believe that, then they won't debate with me. So there's a contradiction there, right? So if somebody says to me, Steph, I want to debate with you, but I don't believe that you exist, that's a contradiction, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm not going to debate with somebody who accepts contradictions, obviously, right?
Yeah, so the contradiction aspect is, you know, you don't want to debate with people that won't play by the rules. I don't want to play chess with someone that keeps moving their rook, you know, diagonally. I agree with you, but where's the should here? It's like I have the hypothetical
No,
imperative.
if you want to debate, then you should be consistent. And now you can try and, like, if you want to play chess, you got to move the rook horizontal and vertical, right? X and Y.
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
so we accept those rules, but you just said if you want to play chess. Like, I agree with you.
Sure. If you want to debate, then you have to accept non-contradiction.
Yeah, if you want to debate me, you have to accept non-contradiction. Yeah.
So by debating me, you are accepting non-contradiction.
But the key word there, Stefan, that you said if, which is a hypothetical imperative.
But who cares? Oh, God, man. Look, do you speak Japanese?
No, I do not.
Okay. So if someone said to you, hey, Steve, why don't you come to Japan and give a presentation in Japanese to Japanese people who don't speak English? What would you say?
I'd say if you pay me enough money and you give me enough time to learn the language, I'll give it a shot.
No, tomorrow. Just, and no pay.
I'd say, sorry, I'm unequipped for it. It's just someone came up and said, hey, do you want to fight Mike Tyson tomorrow? Nope.
Well, I'll wait 20 years and give it a shot, right? But okay, so if you can't provide meaning to Japanese people because you don't speak Japanese, then you're not going to go, right?
Well, I think I could provide meaning to them if I don't speak Japanese, but I'm not going to get pedantic on the point. But no, I wouldn't go.
No, you just said you wouldn't go, right? Let's not get overly
no.
Picky,
But
right?
we say that, but definitions are really clear and stuff. I don't want to end up saying something that's not true, of course. Which is, of course, I can provide meaning to them. They could find my hair or my face funny, or I could juggle. Don't need language for that.
No,
I get your point.
Okay, so let's your language would have no meaning to them, right?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So if somebody genuinely believes that language has no meaning, they will not debate me.
Sure.
We accept that, right?
Or so they can't debate you.
Sorry. Well, no, they themselves will not debate me.
It wouldn't make sense. Yeah, I agree with you.
So by debating, the if is done.
Okay,
so if language has meaning, then you can debate, right?
Okay, so let me tell you where I think that if is, and you correct me where you would put it. Okay, I would say if I want to be accurate about UPB, I ought to debate Stefan Molyneux.
No. Let's stick with the language thing. Well, that's way down the field. That's way down the field.
That's the only reason I'm having a debate. It's all predicated on if clauses. I have
We were just right there. We were just right there to solve the issue, right? So let's just stay where we were just being really productive, if you don't mind, just for a sec. So the if is by engaging in debate, you accept that language has meaning. So if you debate, you must accept that language has meaning, because if you don't accept that language has meaning, you won't debate. The very act of debating solves the if. It's embedded in the act of debating.
So we're going to have to spell this out a little further. So
no, that's good. This is the whole thing, right?
When I say I'm going to debate you, one of the premises, of course, is that language has meaning. I'm either convinced of that proposition or I'm not, and it's necessary that I'm convinced of that proposition to engage you.
Yes,
I agree with you. I need to accept that, and then I can say if I want to be accurate about UPB, I ought to have a conversation, and it's predicated on the fact that I accept that you exist, I accept the language, etc. That there is no should here. The only shoulds we have are hypothetical, and it's in me. It's not universal. It's just me.
I know. I get. Look, I get that. I mean, universal. There are no universals that exist outside of the human mind. I get all of that, right? There's no morality that exists outside of a relationship that we have with each other. There's no scientific method described in the nature of atoms. There's no physical laws in the universe that are written down anywhere except in a book written by human beings. So I get our concepts, our ideas. They don't exist out there in the real world. I get all of that. And if that's where Hume's at, and you can't get these shoulds from the is. I get all of that, right? And that's why I say it's in the act of debating and correcting someone that you're accepting UPB. And so and you've already got one, right? Language has meaning. Now, language has meaning doesn't exist in the universe. It's a concept, right? It's a relationship between you and language and someone that you're talking to. So It's like saying there's no such thing as marriage because marriage is not an umbilical cord that ties two people together, right? I mean, there's no such thing as a forest because the forest is just a concept and the individual trees aren't bounded by a conceptual cloud called forest that you can measure with a spectrometer or something like that, right? So it is the should or the ought is accepted in the very act of conversing. In other words, you accept that language has meaning when you engage in a debate.
Yeah,
And
but
so
that's
if we accept that, that's the should. That's the ought. Language has meaning. It's the only way you get to debate is to accept that. So you can't argue that language doesn't have meaning. That's already off the table.
What's the should?
It's I mean, it's pretty funny to watch this. It's painful, but
Yeah, I mean, I guess now it seems like he's saying, okay, I'm not offering any categorical norms. I'm just offering hypothetical norms. But I think like the hypothetical norm that I'm offering, like the first part, like the if statement, is already accepted by everyone who engages in debate. So at the very least, like in order to debate with me, you have to like concede that I'm right, or you have to accept in a premise that, you know, it from which it follows that I'm right.
I don't think he knows what like the difference between a categorical and a hypothetical. Like, I actually don't think he gets. Like, I think he still thinks he's making some sort of universal statement, but doesn't really. Like, it seems like he doesn't understand.
No, I think that is also my impression that like because so much of this has been Stephen trying to explain to Stefan, all you're giving me are the sort of, you know, okay, sure, from descriptive statements you can get these sort of like, if you have this goal, you know, here's the thing that it would be, you know, advisable for you to do, kinds of kinds of shoulds, but that's not the kind of shoulds you're claiming to get, which are just like statements of absolute morality, right? You know, it'd be wrong for anyone anywhere to do such and such. It's like a really mind-numbingly simple point, but I actually honestly do not think
he doesn't understand.
Yeah. And I think this point about how if you're debating him, you accept universally preferable behavior, I actually think it might be dumber than I thought it was, because what I thought it was originally was that he was saying like, oh, if you're debating me, then you think that, you know, whatever, like talking is, you know, reasoning with people is better than violence or something like that, which is a conclusion of my system, you know, universally preferable behavior. Therefore, you're accepting universally preferable behavior, which would already be pretty bad, right? If that's what he was saying, because it's like also a conclusion of every other moral theory ever, right? But I actually think it's worse than that. I think that what he's saying is like, if you debate me, then you there are certain things that you must reject because it would be inconsistent for you to accept them. Like, you know, you have to accept that language has meaning and stuff like that. And so that means, and if you get that, then you're rejecting things because they're inconsistent. If you're rejecting things from being inconsistent, well, that's like that's like what I think all of morality is. So you have to accept my moral theory.
Yeah.
I mean, that feels uncharitable as I say that, but I actually kind of seems like what he just said.
It seems that way to me as well. I also, it's interesting. A replicator in the chat is saying that his impression is like he does understand, but he just realizes how screwed he is, so he's like panicking. But I don't know. I mean, I think he really doesn't understand. Like I really think he is so. I mean, the fact that he also thinks that he's found the holy grail of philosophy, like the ambition that he sets for himself as like what he's actually accomplished, it like makes me think he really doesn't understand. I don't know, but like maybe he's just trying to gish gallop and like I don't know, seem like he's making a point when he's not.
Yeah.
I don't know, what do you guys think?
It also like. I don't even think it's true that like in order to debate you have to affirm that like truth is valuable, right? Like I could just be I could be debating Stefan Molyneux because I just want to take him down a peg and like I don't actually care about truth. Now, in order for him to like avoid that kind of objection, he'd have to say, okay, well, you have to affirm that truth is valuable if you're debating like in good faith or something, where in good faith just means in a way that's valuing truth. So
no, I mean,
That's a
you
good
could
point.
you could absolutely believe that that Stefan Molyneux is a figment of your imagination, but like you could enjoy having a debate with a figment of your imagination. Like there's absolutely nothing inconsistent about
Yeah.
none of the things that he said. Almost maybe the thing about language and meaning, I don't know, but like
Yeah.
you know, almost none of the things that he said that you have to think in order to have a debate are actually things that it's inconsistent to want to have a debate if you don't think.
I also just like a comment on sort of like Stefan Molyneux's like disposition. I notice like when he gets frustrated, he'll like say like, "Who cares?" Like, have you? He's like, right? He's like, that doesn't even matter. Like, why are you? Like, he'll just do. And I think I don't know if it's in this debate or another one too. Like, he'll start talking about how like the thing we're talking about is boring. He's like, "This is boring. I don't want to talk about this anymore," which is hilarious.
I agree that you can't argue that language doesn't have meaning. What I'm disagreeing with is whether or not the should, as it were, is a categorical or a hypothetical, because it's hypothetical.
If you debate, right? That's the if. If you debate, you must accept that language has meaning. Now, you could say, well, what if you don't accept that? Doesn't matter. You're not debating. Like, you're not part of the conversation.
This is why I gave the first definition of objectively required, because if you say, if you want to debate, you must accept that language has meaning, that's just a description. That's why I gave a descriptive version of UPB, because you do that several times in your book.
I said must. The word must is the synonym for ought.
If you say must, then it is a synonym of short.
You said must.
And if which case you're doing a hypothetical imperative. You're saying
you said so. If you want to debate, you must accept that language has meaning. There's your ought right there. To debate, you ought to accept that language has meaning.
Okay, so the word must can be described as a prerequisite. It's necessary. It's just a factual statement, or it could be a should. I can give you either.
No. Must. There's no must. Hang on. There's no must that exists in the universe.
No, I didn't say must exist in the universe. What I'm saying is, if you say something must happen, or if you're going to say for A to happen, B must happen, you can use that as a description in the sense if you're just describing that it's necessary, it's a prerequisite, which is the first definition that I mentioned that you've rejected. That's fair play. But if you use must as a synonym of should, then you're just, because of your if clause, it's just a hypothetical imperative.
It is a hypothetical. Yeah, I get all of that. And that's why I say, no, that's why I say, that's why I said what premises are implicitly accepted when debating. You have to engage and enter into the act of debating in order for these shoulds, these musts to manifest. And if you're not engaged in the act of debating, then you don't have to worry if you're not correcting anyone, if you're not telling anyone that they're wrong.
So this is going to sound really paranoid, but I think it's actually true. You'll notice that just there, when they were talking over each other, Stefan's voice was like much clearer. I actually think that whatever streaming software he's using is set up to like recognize and pick his voice when that happens.
Yeah, didn't that happen with your debate with him or something like that? Or...
I believe so. Yeah, that's what people were telling me later. That like every time we were talking over each other, which actually happened a lot in that debate, that like his voice was coming through much more clearly. Like I as mind-bogglingly petty as it is, I think he actually did take the time to set it up that way.
It seems like something he would do.
If you're not engaged in the act of polishing the sword of human thought or anything like that, fine. If you're napping, you're not debating, and though you don't have to figure out whether language has meaning, because you can have a bafflegab combination of Klingon and Hobbit in your dreams, and who cares, right? So it's the moment you step into a correction-based conversation with another human being, boom, all of those ifs and oughts are satisfied. At least the ones we've started talking about, that other people exist, objective reality exists, the senses have validity, and so on. Those are all accepted. All of those are accepted. They don't exist in the universe, but they exist in you participating in the act of debating.
I guess to wrap up on this part for now, if you're up for it, and I'll give you the last word on this part. Basically, there's other balls that I want to throw at you, and I don't want to bore the audience with us getting too far bogged into just disagreeing. When I debate with you, I assume lots of things that are contradictory can't be true. So I assume that language has meaning. I assume that reality exists, that you and I inhabit reality, that you and I have a conversation, that language is a useful thing for meaning. I assume all of these things. All of these things are describing facts that are prerequisites, that are necessary for us to have the conversation. But the only way I can say that I ought to have a conversation with you is if I have the categorical imperative of saying, if I want to be accurate about UPB, which I do want to be, I ought to have a conversation with Stefan. What I would say, and what I would try and stress to the audience, that this is not the holy grail of philosophy. It's either just describing what's necessary in order to have a debate, or it's Kant's hypothetical imperative. But I'll give you the last word on this before we move on. Thanks everyone so far for listening, by the way.
No, I don't have a last word on that. I mean, as long as we accept that there are a whole bunch of things that we need to conform to in order to have a debate, yeah, that's UPB right there. Now, let's get. No, I know you say that you don't, but that's fine. I mean, this will come in.
That's UPB.
Come in a little bit later. Now, is there another topic that you wanted to get to? Because I have my list.
No, yeah, I do have another criticism that I think will be good. I'm not 100% on this one, so it'll be definitely good to hear your view on it, as it were. And yeah, if you'd like me to, I'll just get straight to this second ball, as it were. You can consider that the first one. This would be the second.
Yeah, go for it.
Thanks, man. Either you or I should define what begging the question is. Would you like me to do it yourself? I'm
go for it.
Whatever. Sure. So, begging the question occurs when somebody when the conclusion of an argument, begging the question occurs when the premise of an argument is the conclusion. So if I wanted to prove to you, for instance, that the Earth is spherical, and I said, look, premise one, the Earth is spherical, I begged the question. Like, it's game over. It doesn't matter that the Earth is actually spherical. It is still begging the question.
It's like going into a courtroom and saying, okay, let's assume the guy is guilty and then have a trial. It's like, no, that's what you've got to establish, right? Okay.
That's it, man. So one of the most famous examples is presuppositional apologetics. I don't know if any of you, or yourself, or anyone in the audience has had the pain of having to debate a presuppositional apologist, but their argument essentially goes as follows, and they're trying to prove God. They say, look, premise one, logic and argumentation presupposes God. Premise two, arguing against the validity of God demonstrates God. Conclusion, therefore, no argument against God can be valid. It's begging the question because since their goal is to prove the existence of God, their first premise can't be logic and argumentation presupposes God, because it's basically, it's not even basically, it's just straight up including its conclusion in any kind of interaction. And this brings me to your first proof of UPB, which you give on page 40. You say, premise one, the proposition is the concept universally preferable behavior must be valid. That is, to me, clearly begging the question, because if you are trying to prove that UPB exists and your first premise is universally preferable behavior must be valid, correct me where I'm going wrong, but that is clearly begging the question.
No, but I then provide a whole bunch of supporting arguments to that. It's not just a statement, right? I mean, there's a whole series of supporting arguments for evidence towards UPB. So that's not begging the question at all. I'm saying, okay, let's get into evidence that supports the concepts of UPB. Okay,
so if I wanted to prove to you that the Earth is a sphere, and my first premise was the Earth is a sphere, and then you said to me, you're begging the question. I said, no, because I give evidences elsewhere. My argument is still begging the question. Those arguments over there, which can be laid out in premises, may not be begging the question, but it's still begging the question. So I guess
no, I can't go with you there. I don't have the text in front of me, but I go through a lot of effort to establish the validity of UPB. So saying I just state it and that's begging the question, come on. I mean, let's be fair about that.
No, so I don't. If I'm honest with you, I just don't think you understand begging the question. And I apologize if that comes across in any demeaning way. It's not.
Well, no, I don't have the text in front of me, so I mean, I don't know what context you're quoting in.
It doesn't. A syllogism doesn't need context if it's guilty of certain logical fallacies.
No, because if I say UPB is valid, and then I say here's all the arguments why, and you say, well, you're saying UPB is valid, and that's this. Let's not do this part. This part is, I think, beneath both of us. Let's see if we can get on. Because you got to tell me, if you want to start quoting my book, then you got to give me the quote ahead of time so that I can see the context of what it is. You're just pulling one sentence out and saying that's begging the question. That's boring for the audience. And, email me and I'll sort of provide something else. But I can't sort of pull up the text and see what else is around there and all that kind of stuff. So let's, I don't have the context for that. Now, let's get to, if that's all right.
Please,
Sorry?
because this is critically important.
Well, if it was so critically important, why wouldn't you send it to me beforehand so I could have a chance to review the text that you're quoting? I mean, come on, this is an ambush, right?
No, let's not listen, okay? My first video replied to you. The first criticism I gave you was off your first proof, because I assume it's your favorite proof because you put it first. May not be true, it doesn't matter. But I gave you this clearly, and when you reviewed my video, you literally
That's like a year and a half ago, man. Come on. I mean, let's deal with what we can debate in the here and now, rather than trying to quote pull from a book from years ago, from a rebuttal you did from years.
Yes, Replicator, that is correct. Stefan's position right now is that quoting the book that Stefan wrote during a debate about the theories laid out in that book is an ambush.
Yeah. So actually, like, maybe now's a good moment to also mention that, like, I think the reason maybe why I came across this debate like a couple years ago is because this is actually a debate where his own fans got really mad at him. So like, apparently, like, he lost a bunch of subscribers because of what he's doing, like, right now. And I think earlier, I think it was Replicator referenced that thing, which we didn't talk about, which is related to this, that, like, when he put up the debate, he, like, inserted some, like, little, like, 5 minutes of him, like, trying to defend himself into, like, this part. It's pretty funny.
Really?
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
Awesome.
That's great.
Okay. So, like, also, again, it's his book. He wrote it.
Yeah.
Like, I think, honestly, this is a weird thing not to remember if you have, like, arguments with, like, number premises and stuff, and this is the first one you give at the beginning of the book. Like, you should actually remember this probably, but, like, whatever. Put that aside. If you don't remember off the top of your head, you know who I'll bet has a PDF of Stefan Molyneux's book handy? Stefan Molyneux. Like, just take 2 seconds and be like, okay, well, let me pull that up and look at what you're talking about. Like, this is a really weird thing to do. How dare you ambush me by reference? How am I supposed to know what's in my book?
I mean, it's funny. There were a few moments where I felt like Stephen was reading quotes from his book, and, like, Stefan's face, like, looked really puzzled, and I remember being like, this is weird. Like, why are you puzzled by your own book? Like, I don't understand.
Yeah, I mean, it's also just kind of remarkable. This seems kind of like a low blow, but, like, I mean, it is just kind of jarring how, like, Stefan Molyneux is somebody who wrote a book called, like, The Art of Argumentation. Like, he's writing these books about how argumentation works. And then, like, when Stephen presents him with, like, these philosophy 101, like, basic informal fallacies, like, what is begging the question, what is equivocation, Stefan's like, wait, what? Like, it's just kind of weird.
Yeah, and I like how he always gave him the opportunity to. He's like, oh, I think with begging the question, he's like, do you want to? And he's like, no, you go ahead and explain it. Like, clearly doesn't know any of this stuff.
Well, we both know what this means, but you tell me. Yeah,
exactly. Exactly. I'm so glad he's not relevant anymore. I mean, I don't think he's relevant anymore, but there was a weird time when he was, like, relevant in right-wing circles.
Yeah, no, definitely. Like, I think he actually had, like, quite a bit of reach at one point, and, he's, he's definitely, that does not seem to be the case anymore, which, isn't enough to make me reconsider my position on censorship, but it is definitely the other side of the case, right? But the other side of the ledger, but yes, it's like really, like, this is just astounding, right? It's like that he's saying that, well, you can't ambush me with, like, a direct question about a thing that I wrote. right? Like that. That's obviously out of order, you know. Like
like,
to say,
email
like,
me later. Like, tell me the quote later. Like, I can't be bothered to know. How can you expect me to know my own book? It's so
And-
unreasonable.
yeah.
Like,
I
one
mean,
of
he's
the
on his
funniest-
computer, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the funniest things about the quote too is it's not even like, here's what you said, and now I'm gonna like, take 5 minutes to sort of explain to you how this is begging the question, or like it's sort
Yeah.
of subtly begging the question. I'm gonna draw out how the conclusion is like sort of straightforwardly assumed in the premise, but it's like literally the premise is just like the conclusion is true. Like it's not at
Yeah.
all subtle. It's like,
It said he's like it's universally preferable behavior is valid or something. What
Yeah,
was it? It was
yeah.
something like that. It's
Yeah.
like the idea of universally preferable behavior is valid, or something like that. I forget exactly what it was, but yeah, it's astounding, like how he's reacting to this. And I think Stephen like had made a video about this also. So it's not like, I think that was the point he was trying to make. He's like, I made a video like challenging you on begging the question. Like, so it's not like this is
Right. This
surprising.
isn't the
It's not-
first time I've said this. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Because on the face of it, I mean, unless Stephen is really misrepresenting what's in Stefan's book, I mean, it just seems like, well, look, I don't, if you're giving me an actual argument, you're saying like not just an argument, you're giving me like a formal representation of an argument, premise 1, premise 2, conclusion, and one of the premises of that argument is that universally rational, preferable behavior is correct, then no, it literally does not matter how many other arguments you give for that conclusion in the book. This one is still question begging.
Yeah,
Like,
he
I mean,
doesn't
he's-
understand what a syllogism is, clearly. Like,
No, I think, I mean, you were talking, Victor, earlier about student papers where people people say weird shit that it was like reminding you of it because of like some of his long winding detours through
exactly.
like philosophically fancy things that were sort of beside the point. It's like, well, this is also something I've definitely seen in student papers where like somebody gets, okay, you're supposed to like have arguments at some point where you like say premise 1, premise 2, whatever. So I'm just going to kind of pepper that in randomly, but like not necessarily for something that's even an argument. I'm just like, I'm just going to kind of randomly label things with numbers and, like that, because that looks fancy.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
But-
I would
but the-
honestly expect like, I mean, it's just kind of hard to like express like how weird it is. Like, I would honestly expect like somebody who's taken like a semester of like propositional logic to know more than like Stefan Molyneux does about like how arguments work.
Oh, absolutely.
And
Right.
he wrote a
that's-
book
Yeah.
about it too, right? That like what's it?
Yeah,
It's like
Art of the
literally how
Argument.
to argue. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I would, no, absolutely. I mean, like literally the thing about validity and soundness, that is the first day
Yeah.
of any like normal, like deductive logic class. So I think, I mean, there's also a fun thing that happened. I think it was either, I don't remember if it was before or after the debate that I did with him, where he just like found the abstract online of an academic paper that I'd written. And he was trying to like make some like, it's like, oh, look at this dude in his ivory tower writing incomprehensible gibberish, he posted the screenshot of the abstract. And so I offered on Twitter, he was still on Twitter at that point, it's like, look, dude, assuming that you've like mastered like a basic like introductory like symbolic logic class, I could do like 45 minutes of tutoring on Zoom, and I could like get you up to the point where you would understand everything in this paper, right? I mean, this is not, this isn't actually like, there's a little bit of technical language, but it's not that hard. And he didn't take me up on it, but anyway, that's but yes, I would expect somebody who took like a day of like literally a day of a symbolic logic class was paying attention to understand more about the stuff that he does. And certainly like the stuff that Stephen is getting into in this debate, like equivocation, begging the question, all of that stuff, like anybody who'd taken like a informal logic class and like got a B, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
with regards to the other stuff. And I'm not saying it's an invalid criticism and so on. It's just that I can't go and review my book live in a debate. And if it is that important, just next time send it to me ahead of time, and I'll have a chance to review it first.
Okay, I'll finish my point on it. I can see you want to move on. It is important that I stress this to people. When a syllogism begs the question, context is actually irrelevant. The reason being for that fact is that syllogisms work in a function. They try to prove something with their conclusion, and it follows from the premises. If it doesn't follow from the premises, or there's a logical fallacy committed, you do not have to read anything else, end off, because that is the way in which that logical fallacy comes across. When you watch the video, Stefan, I gave you the criticism, I gave you the time to be able to respond, and you simply just said, no, it isn't, and you moved on. And so I was hoping that when we got
I don't know what I said 2 years ago, man. I mean, this is a bit of an ambush, right? Let's deal with stuff that we can reason out in the here and now.
Mate, honestly, if me pointing out where you're begging the question is an ambush, like, come on, man, like, this is the conversation that we want to have, right? You invited me on.
No, but I don't know what the context. This is really boring. Let's do this another time, and maybe you're completely valid, but there's.
Okay, we'll do it another time. If that's what you.
Yeah, there's. I don't know what the context is, and I know that I've got a whole bunch of proofs for UPB, and I'm not just assuming that it's true and moving on. Okay, now let's get to. I did have a chance to look at.
To skip all of your arguments, by the way.
I'm sorry.
Do you want me to skip the other 4 arguments as well, where I can point out the logical fallacies? Because basically you beg the question in 4 out of 5 of them, and the 5th one's a non sequitur. I think I could very clearly show it to the audience, but if you feel like I'm ambushing you,
let's do that. Let's do that when I have a chance to reread the part of the book that you wanted, and I'd love to do it again. I really would. Let's do that when I have a chance to review the book and see the larger context of the arguments and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
Spoiler alert, they didn't do it again.
Let's have a look at. Let me just grab it somewhere up here. I have it in some useful fashion. All right, hang on a sec here. So I did want to have a look at some of the stuff that you had put out. Now, I'm sorry, I will actually post this in the links below. I was hoping to sort of play these directly, but it doesn't look like this particular piece of software actually does allow me to sort of play you in the background and all that kind of stuff. At least I don't think it does. So I will just read these aspects of things, right? So we've gone through a lot of them, but when you say in the video that you did on my Humean suicide, where you've got me as, I think, Dr. Evil or whatever it is, right? So you say, I'm not saying that being correct is preferable to not being correct, right? So you don't state any preferences for being correct, right? And you say, I'm sorry?
Sorry, I thought that you paused to want an answer, but no, I'll let you carry on and then I'll give you the answers.
Yeah, so your quote is, when someone corrects Stefan, they are not necessarily implicitly accepting the fact that it would be better for him to correct his error. While it is fair to say that most people accept this premise, that is, they assume that Stefan has the goal of being accurate about UPB, others don't make this assumption. I, for example, don't. When I correct Stefan, I do so because, 1, I have the goal of being accurate about UPB, and I know that by publicly expressing a critique, I increase the chances of someone else correcting me, should I be mistaken, and 2, I assume that you, the viewer, have the goal of being accurate about UPB. I, however, do not assume that Stefan has the goal of being accurate about UPB because, honestly, I'm not entirely convinced that he does. It's for this reason that I don't tell him that it would be better for him to change his opinion. I don't, in fact, tell anyone that it would be better for them to change their opinion. Indeed, I don't make any ought claim whatsoever. I exclusively make an is claim. It is the case that Stefan is correct. So your approach is that you don't make ought claims, and you don't tell anyone that it would be better for them to change their opinion, and you don't violate the is-ought dichotomy. Is that correct?
So there's a little bit of text before and after that that's relevant, and that is that the word better is like the word greater. It doesn't make sense without a reference. Greater to what? Better to what? And this is where the if clause comes in. So the example I gave was, look, Stefan, if you want to win the race, you ought to sprint as fast as you can. However, if you want to rest your broken leg, you ought not sprint as fast as you can. So I do make if and should statements, but I do them by either explicitly knowing that someone has a hypothetical goal, hypothetical imperative, or I implicitly assume that they have the goal. So most people I interlock with, I assume that they have a preference for truth over falsehood on the matter that we're talking about. And so yeah, it's always contingent, and words such as better or greater or even good
I mean,
are
this
always
is kind of
in reference to
strange
something.
coming
Otherwise,
from rationality rules, right? I mean,
Uh,
this is kind of like a minor point, but like he did say earlier, like I'm with you, Stefan, in that I'm like not a fan of nihilism. I hate moral nihilism, but it's like I don't even think like J.L. Mackey. I mean, J.L. Mackey was like fine with hypothetical imperatives, as are most moral nihilists or moral anti-realists. So like if he's saying, which maybe I'm misinterpreting him, but like if he's saying that I only believe in hypothetical imperatives, no categorical imperatives, then like what's your real issue with moral nihilism, I guess? Unless it's just a semantic point, or you know, I don't believe moral statements make a claim to objective truth, then it seems like you're mostly in agreement.
Yeah, that seems right. I mean, like, I don't. I mean, I am enjoying what he's doing in this debate, but also, the Stephen has, like, he also has a weird position, right? Like and in a way that like does seem kind of like extreme and silly, and a sort of like, you know, like guy who gets really excited about his freshman philosophy class kind of way, right? You know, that so I'm not crazy about any of this. I'm just willing to give it a pass because I want to, you know, because we're not, you know, look, they're not there to really talk about his view anyway. They're there to talk about Stefan Molyneux's view, and we had to get through a lot of Stefan Molyneux just like vomiting up nonsense, and you know, and Stephen being like, oh yeah, no, I think that's largely correct, you know, before yeah, before we got to him actually making all of his objections, and his objections are good. I mean, I'm enjoying that.
No, I think you could tell he was clearly like very laser focused on getting to this point. And I think like you can see, I mean, a lot of people I remember earlier in the chat were like, what the hell is going on? And like, I mean, it was frustrating to watch, but I mean, I do think I respect the approach that he took, because I think it like made sense for his goal. Because I think if he'd gotten too bogged down in like every little thing, he wouldn't have been able to make the objection that he wanted, I think. And still pretty much didn't get to, because like he said, well, he got him to say that he was ambushed, and like I've told you before, that ended up making apparently a bunch of Stefan Molyneux's fans like unsubscribe. Like a lot of them got really mad at him after that. So
Stefan just laid down as a rule, you can't criticize any of the like arguments that I give formal representations of in my book, because like I don't remember them, and I consider this to be an ambush.
Exactly.
But like there's this like nicey pretense that they're going to come back and talk about it again later, you know, once he's had a chance to look it all up.
Yeah, exactly. No, definitely didn't happen.
Yeah.
They make no sense in and of themselves.
But do you think that the word correct is more objective than something like better?
What, correct being more objective than better? Because correct seems to be in relation to you're describing a factual state of the universe. Let's say like it's correct that we're currently interlocked in a conversation, whereas better is it necessarily isn't just. To say better, you need an if clause. You need something that has a reference to it. So it would be better for us to be, you know, having the kind of conversation we have, rather than arguing. Rather than getting, you know, like super angry, if we both have the goal of getting to the bottom of this argument. So one of them requires references and context, if you will, and the other one doesn't. Other than assuming the laws of logic, etc.
Okay, all right, good. So I do have the goal of being accurate about UPB, and that goal is very explicitly stated in the book. It's stated in my multiple videos on the subject. It's stated in my debates. So I'm just curious why you think that I don't have the goal of being accurate about UPB when I.
Yeah. So one of two things has happened. Either you've omitted a really important word from my quote, or I failed to put it in. I'm going to assume the latter, and I apologize for doing it. I assume that you have the preference of being correct about UPB, but I don't assume that you have the preference of being publicly correct about UPB. And it's not even a subtle difference in the sense of, look, let's just say that I put a lot of work into something and I published it and I get money from the sales of it. And people say they recognize me as something quite amazing. They even say, you know, Steve is really important to this field of study because of this book. I might have a preference for truth over falsehood, in the sense that if someone corrects me, I want to be able to like understand the criticisms, but it comes at a massive cost for me to publicly state, you know what, I'm incorrect. So if I know I'm incorrect just myself, I can still defend my theory. Whereas if I am publicly incorrect about it, I lose book sales, I lose my status, I lose these things. The thing I was expressing there is that I'm not entirely convinced that you want to be publicly correct about UPB. And I can understand that might come as an insult, but it's just the fact. It's just the way in which I see it.
Well, I mean, just for the record, I give away UPB. There really aren't any book sales to speak of, and of course, I have a whole series called "I Was Wrong About," you know, X or Y or Z. I've got like, I don't know, a dozen or two dozen videos of public statements correcting errors that I've made, and I know you have the same things as well. So. You know, the monetary incentive is not there. As far as status goes, my status as a thinker is dependent upon me following reason and evidence, not hanging on to something that is incorrect. And I've demonstrated, of course, I think a reasonable capacity, probably more than most, to correct areas where I've made errors in the past. So anyway, I'm just telling you, I do have the goal to be publicly correct about UPB.
No, I understand that you're saying that, but that would actually feed into my concept of you not being publicly correct about UPB, you know? And that is that I still think there's a lot of incentives for you not to be publicly correct about UPB. I actually do think that if you lose this, you lose your contribution to philosophy, and you also lose a objective foundation to justify in and of itself libertarianism, etc. I find that UPB bleeds into a lot of your work and justifies a lot of the things that you speak about, and that there is a loss in it. And the biggest reason as to why I'm not convinced that you have the preference of being publicly accurate about UPB is things such as what happened earlier, where you didn't actually want to delve into the begging the question fallacy. Instead, you said, look, man, you're assaulting me.
Good
this is an ambush. And I also
assaulting you? I didn't say you were assaulting me. What are you talking about?
Ambush.
Sure.
Apologies, wrong word. But this is why I'm not convinced. And to be honest with you, who gives a crap what I think, right? But my point is that it's not necessary for me to assume that about you to interlock in a conversation and fulfill my own hypothetical goals. So I do apologize if it comes off offensive to you or anyone in the audience, but I'm perhaps being a little bit too honest.
No, nothing wrong with being too honest at all. And listen, I find it tough when you say I'm begging the question and you're bringing in a text that I wrote 12 years ago that I haven't reviewed in preparation. I'm happy to have that conversation. But the 2 points that you brought up was, you know, publicly admitting faults or error and financial incentives. And I'm just saying that those don't particularly exist. And there's evidence to the contrary. Okay. So with regards to whether truth has value or accuracy has value, that's sort of the big question. And I think that's where you and I kind of diverge, I guess, a fair amount. The reason why I think that you believe that truth has value, right? Because one of the statements that you say, I'm not saying that being correct is preferable to not being correct. It's a little confusing because, I mean, you have videos like 9 proofs of evolution, why evolution is true. In other words, why evolution is accurate to explain biological history, the world, and so on, why evolution is true, and certainly more true than something like creationism, which I certainly agree with you on. So you got 9 proofs of evolution, why evolution is true. You've got dozens of videos with the words debunked. You've got Big Bang debunked, 3 justifications for scriptural slavery debunked. Everyone is religious debunked, and so on. And there's rebuttals and so on, right? So that seems to me to have a particular preference for accuracy. I mean, even the title of the video that you did on me, Molyneux's Humean disaster / suicide. I mean, if you can't find more negative words in the English language, it would be a challenge, right? So if I'm incorrect, there's negative stuff. And in one of your videos, The Big Bang Debunked, you say, And hence, that's the reason for this video. If you're currently convinced that the universe came into existence from absolutely nothing, then I hope that within the next few minutes, I shatter your conviction because I care about you, right? So I think that's saying that the truth is preferable to error, that accuracy is preferable to inaccuracy. And so that's sort of the positive side. And I'll be real brief here. And this I admire you for, right? That you did the video, that you did a video on transgender athletes and you made some mistakes and you publicly put out a video apologizing and correcting your errors, which I think is a noble and good thing to do. So you said the mistakes I made, let's begin by delving into my mistakes. You said, I really dropped the ball here and will do my utmost best not to make this mistake again. And you said, now this was, in my opinion, my biggest intellectual blunder, a huge mistake. My views on hemoglobin were mistaken and so on. And so if you say that the truth is of value and you are pursuing the truth and you're posting about the truth and you publicly apologize and correct your errors, which again is a noble and good thing to do, you can understand why people would be a little bit confused when you pour this amount of energy into correcting people and debunking and refuting, and you apologize for making errors, and then you say, hey, I don't believe that being correct is preferable to not being correct. Yeah, you can understand why people might be a little confused by that.
Yeah, of course. Allow me to clarify, and thanks for putting that eloquently, actually. So there's a difference between saying truth is preferable to falsehood, and me saying I have a preference for truth over falsehood. So I love the idea of reality and reason and rationality, hence rationality rules. I want people to be living up to what evidence they have access to. And so what I do is I tend to debunk religious arguments primarily, and also pseudoscientific arguments, vaccines causing autism, etc. And the reason I do this is because I have this preference of living in a world where people are more accurate, that they don't take actions which are justified by, essentially.
Footnote, I wonder where Stefan is now on vaccines cause autism.
Yeah, I was looking as soon as he said that. I looked at Stefan like is he's going to raise an eyebrow or something. I wasn't sure.
I mean, this is in 2020. He might have been fine with vaccines at that point.
Yeah, maybe. I haven't heard anything of like how he reacted to the COVID thing, because I think he was already banned by then. I think, right? Or
well, no. Well, he wasn't banned when COVID first happened, right? I mean, like this is. I mean, in fact, COVID had already happened when this debate happened.
Did it?
Yeah, because it was a real blink and you could miss it, but he did refer to it at one point earlier. He said, when he first started talking about Vegas, he was like, well, if there wasn't coronavirus and everything wasn't on fire, right? Because this is summer of 2020.
Right. Wouldn't it have been summer 2021? Didn't it? Oh, you're right. Never mind.
Yeah,
right.
yeah. He's made a bunch of references to those 2020 riots. So
right.
So yeah, and that's also around the same time I did my. In fact, mine with him might have been a little bit earlier than this, but I think he hadn't. Like this is all during that weird window when like people who were super Trumpy didn't necessarily have weird views about COVID yet. Like he had like I did a very short, very strange debate with Gavin McGinnis in like late spring 2020, where like we were arguing about libertarianism. I mean, I think McGinnis is a libertarian the way Stefan Molyneux is a libertarian, right? But they have but he's allegedly a libertarian. So we're arguing about this, and in the argument, he seemed to assume that like even though he thought that they should be voluntary or whatever, he seemed to assume on some level that like COVID lockdowns were correct because all of the like super Trumpy people hadn't pivoted on that yet. So I think that probably at this point like Stefan's would just nod along to that. It's like, yeah, anti-vax, that's stupid, right? Like
yeah, because I guess the vaccine wouldn't have been out yet, right? Summer 2020.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, vaccines. Yeah, the vaccines. I think started to like this was it was like it was like really late 2020 that like it was even like announced that it was like kind of going to be ready, and it was like in the opening months of 2021 people were like people who wanted to take it were like scrambling to find some.
Right.
So so yeah, at this point I might be wrong about this, I don't know, I haven't kept up with him since he's moved to whatever platform he's on now, but my guess would be that Stefan is like has like super stupid views on COVID now, because like I think he would almost have to.
Yeah, of course. I love how politely Stephen like accused him of being a grifter, like just like so like the most polite possible way, where he's just like, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be like, but like I just think it's very possible that like you publicly, which is just really a way of saying like, I you might not believe this shit, but like that if you admit you don't believe it, you're gonna lose all your followers.
Yeah.
Faith. So I have this goal, and I make these videos because my goal is to convince people of what is actually rational. I want to not only convince them of what's true, my goal is to get it so that they appreciate it as much as me, and that we can, develop as a society and become better. But the most critical thing here is I never say just as a blanket categorical statement that truth is better than falsehood, because I don't think I can. All I can say is that I have the goal of, almost in all things, in fact everything, I want to be having true beliefs rather than false beliefs. There's a couple of caveats, but again, this is just philosophy, and there's just different ways in which I can achieve that fact, but there's nothing categorical here. So I mean, do you think I'm doing anything categorical, universal?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not hugely clear on how you don't prefer accuracy to inaccuracy as a value, not just for yourself, but for the world as a whole. I mean, that's, to me, not particularly clear. But so here's the thing. So your big thing with me is the is-ought dichotomy, right? And I get all of that. So I would, of course, assume, and I went into your video saying, okay, well, I assume that Stephen is not going to be doing any violations of the is-ought dichotomy. And listen, I'm not trying to catch you out here, and perfect welcome to put back and say I need context, and we can talk about it another time. Perfectly valid, because I said, hey man, you ambushed me with a bunch of detail that I don't have in front of me. So you can push back on this. But one of the things I found kind of confusing was you've got a video called Jordan Peterson is not a Christian.
Yeah.
And you say, according to many of the most popular definitions of a Christian, Peterson is not one, and that therefore many of his Christian followers ought to cease asserting that he's championing their beliefs. Right? So you've got a fact statement. Peterson is not a Christian, according to most.
Joe, I absolutely agree. He says, why would you not say the truth is better than falsehood? What the heck? That's what I'm saying. It's like, I think Stephen has a kind of silly guy who got way too excited about his freshman philosophy class and is like, and is like biting bullets he doesn't really need to bite. Like that's, yeah, I find it annoying. That's just a sideshow here, so we're not focusing on it.
No, I think you're right. I mean, I think he does, like, I haven't consumed a lot of his other content, but I mean, it does very much have like new atheisty, like, like undergrad philosophy, learned how to argue vibes of like, focusing and like, yeah. So I'm not surprised, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, you could just like, I mean, it just seems like it just kind of reeks to me of like, you're going through this phase where you're like, you get excited about the fact that like what you're saying sounds so bold and counterintuitive, and so you just kind of like run with that instead of like actually thinking about it's like, okay, what's the core here? Is there like, do I actually have to say all of this to make sense of like the sort of basic thing that seems right to me? But
yeah, it is sort of weird. Like Stefan Molyneux said it at some point, because I think Stephen had said, I don't think that truth is like valuable. I value it. And Stefan Molyneux had said something like, so you think that it's not valuable for the whole world, it's just valuable for you? But I mean, that's sort of ambiguous, because Stephen could say, no, I value when the whole world follows truth. And so it's like, I value when everyone does it. It's not just restricted to me doing it that I find good, but it's still my valuation. It's not like this thing is intrinsically valuable independently of what anyone thinks of it, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, you could think that, like, you could find, like, the color yellow really disgusting, and so, like, every time, you know, and so it's not just that you don't personally want to wear a yellow shirt, like, you disvalue anybody anywhere wearing a yellow shirt, but you could still disvalue that without thinking that it's, like, objectively bad to wear a yellow shirt.
Mm.
Like, you just have, like, a really strong aesthetic preference that's for, you know, that, like, you have for everybody, and so, yeah, I mean, I think what he's saying is I think it's a little silly, but I think it's internally consistent.
Popular definitions, and then you go straight into an ought statement or a value statement. Therefore, many of his Christian followers ought to cease asserting that he's championing their beliefs. I'm trying to figure out how that is not a violation of the is-ought dichotomy that you find objectionable within me.
Yeah, no, I'll give it to you. So as you said, you know, when we argue with someone or we try and convey anything to anyone, we implicitly make assumptions. Call me criminal, but when I talk with a Christian, I assume that they actually believe in God. I assume that they actually want to promote the values of Christ. So what I'm saying in that statement is, look, Jordan Peterson is essentially entirely an atheist. It's just he plays with words in the same way that Deepak Chopra does with energy, and it's actually managed to confuse some real Christians into thinking that he's fighting their cause, and he might be fighting their cause, but he's certainly not a Christian. So what I'm saying there, what's implicit there, because, you know, as you said, everything has implicit premises. The implicit premise there is I'm thinking that they have the goal, the hypothetical imperative of championing Christianity. So I'm assuming a goal in those people. Right now with this debate with you, for example, I'm assuming that most of the audience has a goal to be accurate about UPB. And it's just a hypothetical imperative. I might be wrong on my assumptions. I might be wrong on my assumptions with when I tell people that they need to watch out for Peterson, Christians that they need to watch out for Peterson. Some Christians, that's definitely true. They know what Peterson's about. They still want him counted as a Christian. They still want to move forward with it. So, you know, my ought would have no meaning to them whatsoever, because my assumption of their hypothetical imperative has no basis. I hope that makes sense.
Okay, so that's with regards to Christians. I appreciate that clarification. The mistakes of many on transgender athletes is one of your videos where you say trans women must be able to compete. Now, trans women, of course, an objective.
What's trans women?
Trans women must be able to compete. You said this is one of the, and again, if it's a little fragment, I was hoping to be able to play more, but the browser is not letting me play this through. So trans women must be able to compete. That's your what, right?
Well, see, this is where we're getting into the word of must. And I'm saying that it's required that trans people are able to compete in some fashion or some form. Like my views on, because if you have a goal which says it's a human right to be able to compete in sport, what I'm saying is it necessarily follows that they must have the right to be able to compete in some degree, in some league, whatever league it might be, it doesn't matter. This is where that first definition, if you will, was coming in. And all I'm doing is describing a fact. I'm saying if you're saying humans fit this category where they must, fit this category where they have a human right, you can't rob that human right from one segment. That's why I'm making that statement there.
So you're universalizing it.
In an objective descriptive statement. I'm saying given what was said, yeah, but this should no or.
Oh no, you said must.
Yeah, and I told you by must I'm using what I accused you of using with your first definition, which is I'm just saying it's required.
Yeah, since that which is a characteristic of human being must be a characteristic of all human beings, right?
What I'm saying is that if we're saying, and it's in and of itself, it's predicated on this, it's hilarious. And what I'm saying is that if we have a rule, which is that all human beings must be able to compete in the Olympics, then it must necessarily follow that all human beings can compete in the Olympics. This is it's only a descriptive statement. I'm just saying must. And you know what? Sometimes I mess up with my language and stuff, but I don't think.
No. I'm not trying to catch you per syllable. I'm just really genuinely trying to understand how you get oughts.
So let me
say, but I don't have any preference for correctness, and you can't violate the is-ought dichotomy. Now, I get you got a bunch of if statements, and you're saying, oh, but my if statements are implicit, and it's like, well, but I have implicit if statements, and you know, and sometimes it's if statements that you reject. But here, at least you're saying that which is a category of human beings must apply to all human beings. Of course, women are human beings, and therefore, right. So this is back to the argument earlier about murder, that if you have a characteristic of human beings, that it must apply to all human beings. Now, here's the big one. Here's the big one, which I think hopefully we can sink our teeth into, because this is the one that troubles me the most, which of course is not an argument. I'm just telling you straight up, right? So sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I don't want to interrupt. I've had more than enough of the floor. You go ahead. So
why are people entitled to the fruits of the labor of others? And you say, economist Walter E. Williams, he makes this statement basically that I want to keep what I make and you should keep what you make, and so on, right? So you say Walter E. Williams inherited a biological and or social advantage that he did not earn, and thus he does not deserve all the fruit of his labor. So this is really fascinating to me, because you go from a statement of fact, of course, I did not earn my height, I did not earn my blue eyes, I didn't earn the fact that I speak English, which happens to be a pretty common language around the world. And so I get all of that. Like, there's so much in our lives that we inherit, accidental, genetic, we don't earn it, and so on. So that's a statement of fact, right?
So the statement of fact is, I mean, like, so what
stuff
you're
we don't earn.
I think this is a video I made on libertarianism quite a long time ago.
Yes. So you have a statement of fact that says Walter E. Williams inherited a biological and or social advantage that he did not earn, right? That's a statement of fact, right?
Yeah, but this is an argument against libertarianism, as it were. And it requires a lot of unpacking on why I would say those words and how I'm describing them. So,
well, no, so far it's just a statement of fact.
Well, no, because what would you say the statement of fact is?
Well, that Walter E. Williams inherited a biological and or social advantage that he did not earn.
Oh, as in like he did not earn, as in he didn't plow the fields, or he didn't...
No, he did not earn, I think, the examples you provide with regards to yourself is that you say that, and I sympathize with you for this, of course, right? So you say, despite the fact that I come from a broken family and had a very rough upbringing, I am extremely lucky to have the characteristics that I do. And while I've worked extremely hard to get where I am, I did not earn the temperament, patience, charisma, and, if you will, intellect that I have. I was simply dealt good biological cards, right? So there are certain genetic and environmental situations that we happen to be born into relatively free countries and in modern technological age and so on, right? And a certain amount of intelligence, a certain amount of good health. We didn't get hit by a bus and so on. So there are a lot of attributes that we have that we are not personally responsible for in terms of like just good fortune, good luck, right?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like we're going into topics such as libertarianism, etc., in general, rather.
No, I don't want to go into that. I'm so far, I'm just saying that you're making statements of fact that Walter E. Williams inherited a biological. I'm sorry.
Just going to say, I haven't written a book on it, etc. I'm not like super sure on things. In that video, for example, I was explaining why I'm not convinced of libertarian theory, as it were. I mean, I just trying to get to the bottom of what's the fact statement that you think I'm saying, as it were.
This example
I'm
doesn't
sorry, I
even
feel like
work,
I'm just repeating myself here.
Because that's a normative premise, right? If you say people have these attributes that they don't earn, so they don't like deserve the fruits of these attributes, then like that's not a purely descriptive statement.
Yeah,
right?
sounds pretty normative, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, I mean, I really wish that Stephen had not didn't have this weird view that he's never allowed to utter the word ought, without explaining it in terms of a conditional.
Yeah.
Because it's such a distraction from what's otherwise a really beautifully clean skewering of Stefan's bizarre view about ethics.
Totally.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Like, it's super weird how, like, we get it, you're an anti-realist, that's fine, but like, why do you feel the need to couch like every normative statement you make in terms of like a hypothetical, if-then statement? Like, it just seems like really weird and unnecessary. Like,
Well,
even
wait,
if you are an anti-realist.
now that now you're reminding me that at the beginning of the debate, he actually said that he was a moral realist.
He
Like,
did,
yeah.
didn't he? Yeah.
He did say that. He said that he's like that. You and I agree on that. He's like, but my reasons for it are different. So like, maybe somewhere else he has a view like that leads to some kind of moral realism. But like right now, he's just responding to the things that Stefan
But you'd
Molyneux
think
is
if he
accused
had
of.
that view,
Yeah,
he'd be able to just express
totally.
statements, which is, and I should also say, lol ruffle bowsation, that thank you for the super chat, that, like, say that, it's not even that the anti-realism about is necessarily silly. It's the like being unwilling to say on this sort of straightforward, intuitive level, truth is better than falsehood, and then like say, yeah, of course, I think truth is better than falsehood. I mean, we could get into what I mean by that, and like, the senses I would or wouldn't accept or whatever. Like, just sort of say, no, I actually don't think truth is better than falsehood. That just feels like, ooh, look at me, being all like bold and counterintuitive. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Philosophically
exactly.
edgy. Yeah, totally. I mean, that's true. I wonder whether he might be also doing so if he is actually a moral realist, like I wonder if he's just trying to avoid getting into an argument with Stefan Molyneux like about that, because like maybe he's like just making some sort of like practical decision to be like, well, I don't want to get into that, and I just want to keep steering the argument in a way where I have to like talk about hypothetical imperatives to like continually like push that point against Stefan Molyneux, because maybe if he like says he does get an ought from something, then it's like Stefan's gonna like, I don't know, push the conversation like off the rails. I mean, this is like me being super like overly generous maybe for like his motivations, but I guess it's possible for practical reasons he just didn't want to get into it. But
yeah,
it's still weird the way he's situating it though.
I think I'm vaguely familiar with at least Rationality Rules' former view. And it was a view that I think he got from his buddy, who is also like an atheist YouTuber named Cosmic Skeptic. And Cosmic Skeptic's view, I don't know if he holds it anymore, but it was, and I think Rationality Rules like agreed with this. It was some weird, like, he starts out by claiming that like psychological egoism is true. Or he says like, okay, so there are only hypothetical norms, and then psychological egoism is true. And so we have these if-then statements, and then we know that everybody values pleasure or values their own pleasure. And because everybody values their own pleasure, we can make like a hypothetical conditional statement based on that premise. And somehow he thinks that leads to like utilitarianism, which I don't think so. But I mean, that's sort of like the view.
Is that guy Cosmic Skeptic? Is that person like a theist now, or am I thinking of someone else?
I don't think so.
No, I think he's maybe he identifies as an agnostic now, but I think he still says that like if you were to ask me what's most likely, I would say theism is like not true.
Okay. Maybe I'm thinking of someone else.
Yeah,
maybe
actually,
like perspective philosophy. Maybe is that another guy who's a theist? Yeah,
he just became a theist. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, okay, yeah.
I actually the Alex O'Connor, Cosmic Skeptic, I actually met that guy in real life earlier this summer. At that festival in the UK, the Hey on Why thing, and which is actually like my big takeaway, by the way, is he looks and sounds like really disconcertingly like a young Quentin Smith. So whatever, take from that whatever you want. But there was this. But I talked to him for a little while. Like we had a beer and got into some of his stranger philosophical views. I actually got the conversation was cut off earlier than it should have been because there's this other dude who was there who who I really wanted to talk to, who'd like filmed a documentary about Christopher Hitchens in 1999, who and that guy, appropriately enough, had like gotten kind of wasted and like wandered off, and I had to like go find him. So the Alex O'Connor conversation was cut off early, but yeah, that's I would guess, based on the conversation I had with him, he probably has some like sort of slightly weird, well, you know, skeptical kinds of views about knowledge and all that stuff that would like fuck with getting to say that you're atheist instead of agnostic, but like that has nothing to do with actually warming up to religious belief.
Right.
Statement is that we have characteristics that we do not earn, that are like, so for instance, IQ is largely genetic, and so the matter of intelligence is not something that we can take personal pride in how smart we are. I mean, obviously there's some things we can do to help and improve it. There's 10 to 20% that's in play. Our height, you know, tall people obviously sometimes make more money. Obviously, generally they make more money. Pretty people make more money. And our looks and our height, I'm gesturing at myself, looks like I'm some Adonis, but you know what I mean, right? So our height, our looks, or whatever it is, the skin color, we don't earn those. They're just accidents of birth, right?
So, well, one, if we're going to assume determinism, which is one of the things I assume, one of the things I'm convinced of, then we have a whole lot to unpack there for why I could say about what's earned. Like, if somebody says they didn't earn something, like, that's a whole debate to argue through. You know, you've got John Rawls and you've got Robert Nozick. You have to go through all of these things. So my statement of we didn't earn something came after the fact that I was explaining determinism and explaining how I've got to that pathway per se. It's a statement of fact that's predicated on other facts that I've given. There's no ought or should here.
No, I get that. I'm trying to get to the ought without a doubt. I mean, and of course, I mean, there's no sane person. I know that's not an argument, but it's just one of these basic things. Of course we don't. You know, it's like saying I invented English. I mean, you know, I'm not like Al Gore. I didn't invent the internet, right? So you say Walter E. Williams inherited a biological and or social advantage that he did not earn, statement of fact, and thus he does not deserve all the fruit of his labor. Now that's an ought statement, right? So you're going from the is that he didn't earn everything about him to the ought that he ought not keep everything that he makes.
But
now
the
that
ought is accept the theory, the arguments that I gave before. Again, it's hypothetical. It's if you accept the arguments I make, it follows that he ought not keep all of his thing. If you don't accept that ought, if you don't have that hypothetical imperative, then I'm just farting in the wind to you. And that's fair play, because that's the nature of hypothetical imperatives.
No, but you say he does not deserve all the fruit of his labor. In other words, that he should have his labor or his money taken from him by force because he didn't earn, because you're talking about taxation and a redistribution of state, right? And so you're saying because he didn't earn everything about his nature, his genetics, and so on, therefore force should be used to take money from him. And listen, I mean, the whole debate about taxation is force, we can maybe have another time. My sort of basic issue, hang on, my basic issue here is that what you consider as a violation of the is-ought dichotomy in terms of UPB and so on, right? So you can reject UPB, and I don't think any force should be used against you. I don't think you should be censored. I don't think you should be thrown in jail. Any of these things, right? So here's my issue, and I'm perfectly willing to be schooled on all of this. It's going to be tough, but I'm willing to be schooled. When you consider that I have violated the is-ought dichotomy, when I have done so in a manner that does not require any force, I'm not forcing it on anyone. I'm not saying anyone should go to jail. But when you get an ought, in other words, force used against someone to take their property, when you get your ought out of the is that he didn't earn everything about his attributes or his earning potential, I got to tell you, it bothers the hell out of me that you can violate the is-ought dichotomy with guns, but I can't violate it with reason. You know, that's pretty wild to me.
Libertarianism in order to somehow poison the well, because most of the audience is a libertarian. You almost want them to know that I'm not a libertarian. I know that you are claiming, no, I'm just using an example like this. You know, a lot of your audience are right-wing leaning, so you want to bring up the fact that I defend trans people. Like, this all feels like poisoning the well. But that's not an argument.
You can have your feelings, but maybe we could just talk about the facts.
Absolutely, just talk about the facts. I don't know how many times I can say it to you with these different examples. It's hypothetical imperatives. Anytime I say that you should or ought do something, I am giving the hypothetical imperative. Why? I don't think there is such a thing as categorical imperatives. If I'm describing
Then how do you get to enforce your ought by guns? That's my question. How do you get, because there are going to be people who disagree with you about you taking other people's property by force.
Now you're talking.
Yeah, it was really clear that last one that Stephen's voice was like scrambled when they were talking over each other.
Totally.
That's
Your
awesome.
suspicions seem more and more like plausible.
Yeah, I mean, it also seems like Stefan Molyneux is just kind of equivocating here, like again,
Yes.
where he's saying like you're going from like an is to an ought, and really what Stephen is doing is he's just like making this argument like, you know, these people didn't earn these attributes, so therefore they shouldn't you know, be able to benefit from them at the expense of other people or something. And so he's making like an argument that he finds like intuitively morally plausible, and that involves like a descriptive premise, right?
Yeah, but
he's
as
not
you
claiming
as you
that
pointed out earlier, he's going from an ought to an ought, right? They didn't earn it.
Yeah, and also like the conclusion doesn't have to be an ought in the sense that like he thinks this is some sort of robust, like realist, you know, conception of like a, you know, desire independent reason for action or something, right? It could just be like, yeah, I'm using the word ought in the conclusion because it's intuitively plausible to me, right? Like it's a normative judgment that I'm comfortable making, but I'm not saying that it's like objective or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems really clear. And God, I love how smug Stefan looks in this, you know, where we paused it here. But like, it just seems really clear what Stefan is doing here, which is like
such a punchable face, eh? It's unbelievable.
Because the shape of all the examples is the same, right? That like in every case, because Stephen's got this weird position that you know that they're only hypothetical imperatives, right? It's anytime there's an ought, there's some implicit goal in the background. Fine. So because of that, he will say things like I mean, whatever. In this case, he's not even actually doing it, right? I think you're right. You know, there is a normative premise in the background about, you know, when he says you haven't earned it, but like whatever, like he's saying like here are some facts in light of which you can derive conclusions about what would advance some goal, what you ought to do in the sense that would advance some goal. That's what he's saying in every case. And some of these are like moral kinds of background goals. Some of them aren't, you know, but so like the actual structure of it is the same in every case, but Stefan is excited about this because it just gives him a chance to shamelessly pivot from like the actual subject of the debate to just like beating up on him for being a statist.
Exactly. I mean, I think his points about like poisoning the well, I mean, I think that seemed plausible to me too. Like when he tried to call him out on that and be like, you know, you're bringing up all these things that don't really have to do with the argument that we're talking about, and like, why would you be doing that?
Yeah, you're picking the examples where your audience is going to disagree with me on the substance of it, even though it's absolutely nothing to do with what we're arguing about right now. And it's like, yeah, that like, look, he could just, you know, obviously it's not inconsistent to say I'm not a moral realist. I don't think that there are freestanding like objective moral rules, but you know, my preference is for like statist redistribution. That's no more inconsistent than saying I don't believe in, you know, objective moral rules, but my preference is for libertarianism, right? There's no difference between those, right? But like again, Stefan is just like doing this shameless bait and switch where he's like, look, I can shift from this argument that I'm losing about universally preferable behavior to me wrapping myself in this protective shield of like moral indignation about statist redistribution.
Exactly. And like, look at his face. It's paused. It's like, he knows what he's doing. He knows what he's fucking doing.
Well, and it's also, I think this is a better way to phrase it. I was trying to get at this a minute ago, but I think I messed up the explanation. But I think like what he's sort of doing is even putting aside the fact that the premise he mentioned is normative, right? But like even if it wasn't, right? Like so he's taking a statement from Stephen, which was like these people didn't earn these benefits, and so therefore they shouldn't benefit over other people because of these things that they didn't earn, right? And so that's the statement that he's taking. And Stefan Molyneux is trying to say that he attempted to sort of cross the is-ought gap there, right? But you're taking a natural language statement and then you're accusing it of doing the is-ought thing, which is like a problem of logical deduction. But if we were to like charitably translate the natural language statement into like formal logic, there would be another normative premise, like if these people didn't earn X, they ought not to benefit from it, or something like that. Like that would clearly be present in any sort of common sense or charitable, logical like reinterpretation of what Stephen said.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems really clear that Stephen's position is that anytime he's making an ought statement, that that he thinks like, well, look, if you are sharing some goal that I think in the context of this argument, it's fair to assume that people are sharing, then given that, right, then also given this other stuff, you ought to do it, which is a perfectly internally consistent thing to say. I mean, you could argue about whether it's a good view of like what all ought statements are like or whatever, but I mean, there's nothing inconsistent about it. And yeah, he just I tend to agree that this is at this point, he's it's not even subconscious. I mean, like he's just like being cynical about this. He's like, look, I know I lost a lot of the audience earlier. I'm probably gonna have to put in a whole 5-minute explanation of what
which he did.
But I can at least get some of them back on my side if I if I go, I'll kill the commie on this part.
Exactly.
And yes, I do like that from Wade. This is that's a where we pause. That's a how does that voice canceling software?
True.
You're trying to get me to justify a position on libertarianism. You've switched the debate. Like, do you want to talk UPB or do you want to talk about libertarianism?
No. Your criticism of UPB is that I'm violating the is-ought dichotomy, and I'm doing so in a perfectly peaceful manner. So how the hell do you get to violate the is-ought dichotomy by threatening people with jail who disagree with your ought? I mean, how are you so confident on your ought that you're willing to deploy the armed might of the state to imprison people who disagree with you? That is not rationality rules. That is brutality rules.
This is just political now, Steph. If you want to talk,
are you saying there's no force involved in taxation?
No what thoughts?
There's no force involved in taxation.
Force involved in taxation. The argue, if you want to argue whether or not taxation is moral, then it's a different question to be had than the one that we're having, because I know that you've built UPB around your book, which, by the way, is another reason why I don't think you want to be publicly accurate about UPB. It's funny when Christians tend to, and the religious in general, they tend to start with their conclusion and work backwards. I don't think it's a coincidence that UPB just so happens to substantiate libertarianism theory. I'm not going to discuss libertarianism. I'm not a professional on it. All I was expressing in that video is I'm not convinced of the proposition of libertarianism. If you want to talk libertarianism, either I have to go away, do my research and come back, or we're done, man, because I'm here to talk UPB. And it sounds like you just want to talk about trans and libertarianism.
No, I'm talking about the is-ought dichotomy. All right, let's leave the coercion element of libertarianism and we'll go to your objective morality, because, you've been grilling me for years over my version of ethics. I think that's perfectly fine, which is why I'm happy to have the conversation.
Do you want to do a second conversation for that? We've been going 2 hours. I'm more than happy to have a discussion about my objective morality with you, but surely it constitutes a different argument, because if we titled this UPB debate, that's what we've had, and then it could be you grilling me here on the next debate on my moral framework. But the thing is I haven't published a book. I don't claim to be essentially the second coming of Socrates with the holy grail of moral philosophy.
Oh, talk about poisoning the well. Yeah.
No. This is the end. There's only a few drips left. I can be honest with. I mean, if you describe that's how you describe it in your book, Stefan. You say it is the holy grail of philosophy. That is a quote. That's the way that you've expressed it. Me saying that isn't poisoning.
Second coming of Socrates. Come on.
It's the same thing. Oh man, if someone came with the holy grail of philosophy, that is the second coming of Socrates.
Okay, well, you're complaining about straw man, and now you're putting words in my mouth that I've never said. All right.
We could call it a synonym. I
You
would
can
say,
call it whatever you want. Just recognize that you're violating the whole straw man thing, because I've never said that.
not really. Imagine if someone came along and they produced.
No. Forget the abandoned stuff. We're trying to deal with empirical stuff here. Okay. Well, let's close this off. And I just, as a teaser, hopefully for the next debate, this is what you say, because you really don't like violating the is-ought dichotomy. But you say axiomatic oughts are feelings of obligation that exist self-evidently, and they do so without proof or argument. They just are. They're facts of nature. We can quarrel about the axiomatic ought, but here's the thing. If you already accept it, whatever reason, or let's face it, lack thereof, for all intent and purposes, what's the problem? Nature has made it so that we are born with axiomatic oughts. And while, again, this is intellectually dissatisfying, you say, we just have to get on with it. As inconvenient as it might be, we are not born with a blank slate, and all moral discourse must finally accept this brute fact. In other words, existence is synonymous with ought, axiomatic oughts based upon the nature of human existence. So when you come to me and say, hey, Steph, you might be touching around the violation of the is-ought dichotomy, and your entire moral philosophy is based upon axiomatic oughts that are synonymous with human life and existence, it's like, dude, you might want to take another swing.
You ought to know something. That video is quite old, and I've changed my mind since then. I've had some conversations with some moral philosophers. I mean, I hadn't published a book, you know, I was just being someone who's open and talking about these discussions. I had this discussion with Alex O'Connor and a couple of others, and my mind's since been changed. So
no, I didn't see any corrections on the video, so you probably should put that on.
Yeah, man, I'll get that on, no problem. I need to go through a lot of my older stuff, but no, I don't hold that view. Someone illustrated to me that while it's true that we're born with innate preferences, as it were, you know, everybody wants to avoid what Jeremy Bentham called our two sovereign masters, which is pain and pleasure, which is better translated to suffering and pleasure. The ought itself is derived from that fact. It isn't an ought that exists just in nature per se. But hey, man, like once I publish a book, I'd love for you to give me a critique, and you and
I mean, the claim, I mean, this is a claim that I've heard him make before, but he'll say like, and I think Alex O'Connor says this too, which is like, we all, we all have innately, it's just like a fact about humans that we all have the desire to avoid pain. And it's like, well, I guess if you define pain as like that which is undesired when experienced or something,
right,
like sure, but like then it's just, you haven't really said anything.
Clearly, there are situations in which people actually do desire pain.
Yeah, on any like non-tautologist construal of the terms pain and undesirable, those two things are not like always going to coincide.
Yeah, people usually don't want pain in the ordinary sense of that term, but yeah, that's you know, that has a lot less oomph to it. You know, if you say it that way. All right, that's
to go again. And I guess what I'd like to say is that, correct me if I'm wrong, would I be correct to say that you think that I say it's my position, it's your peers' position that have critiqued UPB, would you say that they're incorrect with their statements of that you are not clear with your definitions in the sense that you equivocate on 3, that you beg the question 4 times in your 5 proofs, and on your 5th one, it's a non sequitur? I assume that you still believe in UPB, at least publicly, and held to that. Like, you don't think any of my criticisms have had any clout whatsoever. Would that be accurate? Or do you believe that, I mean, I found it as a productive conversation. I've actually enjoyed it, by the way.
I'm sorry, was that, the question is, do I think UPB is perfect? Well, of course not. I mean, things can always be improved. Clarifications can always be made. This is why I've done so many videos, and I've done a rewrite UPB in a very short format. I've got Platonic dialogues in my latest book, Essential Philosophy. UPB can always be clarified. It is a tough theory. It is really, you know, we have, all of us, been so programmed with a particular view of ethics. I mean, in my case, I grew up a Christian. I was a socialist for a while, so I have a lot of, I have a high population of ethical theories, and even these aren't even the ones that I've studied in my graduate degree and all of that, the Hegel and Locke and Kant and Plato and Aristotle. So I got a congregation in here all kind of yelling moral theories at me. And I think we have that a lot. You know, we even if you've not sort of studied these things formally, we got a lot of stuff going on with us in terms of ethics, a lot of contradictory ideas, some nihilism, some postmodernism, some Marxism. All of this stuff is floating around in our head. And to me, at least, working on a moral theory is kind of like trying to do math when someone's yelling numbers into your ear. It's really, really tough. So UPB is a real challenge. Now, that obviously is not any kind of proof of its validity. But of course, the moment you bring in proof, that is a universally preferable standard of behavior to pursue accuracy, to pursue truth in debate. So for sure, you can't have theft as universally preferable behavior. For sure, you can't have murder as universally preferable behavior. For sure, you can't have rape or assault as universally preferable behavior. That is without a doubt, that has never been challenged. You acceded to that, and I don't mean to say this to lord it over you. I'm just sort of saying a basic fact of the debate. So if all UPB, hang on, I'll be done in a sec. I'll give you the last word. So if all UPB has been able to do is to validate that the bans on rape, theft, assault, and murder, yeah, that's a pretty cool thing. That it's a pretty good thing to have a secular, non-religious, non-state enforced logical proof for bans on rape, theft, assault, and murder. And for support for property rights, for support for self-defense, for support for non-initiation of force, support for and proof of the evils of spanking and of circumcision and all these other things that have occurred. If all I've
we left this out earlier, but just for anybody for whom this is their first dose of Stefan Molyneux, that stuff about spanking and circumcision, I mean, this is like this is like right at the top of the list of subjects he gets most excited about.
I've done is to prove that rape, theft, assault, and murder, spanking, circumcision, abuse, and all of this, and the initiation of the use of force, invalidated self-defense. Hey, if that's all I've done, okay, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Now, if there are sort of questions around, okay, how many things are implicitly accepted in a particular debate, and I think that's great. Those are very interesting discussions to have. But if all you've got out of it, or all the audience has got out of it, is that rape, theft, assault, and murder can never be universally preferable behavior, whew, I mean, I'm a happy guy. So go ahead and please, people, your channel and site again.
Sure. I know it's got a bit heated and whatnot, which is always actually something I enjoy about debate, and I hope you do too. But first and foremost, thank you for having the conversation. It is a sign of good faith, and I have thoroughly enjoyed it. And as we said, hopefully we'll do it again on other topics / this topic if it comes up again. Maybe. Yeah,
and let's email each other with a bit of prep stuff, because I think it's always better if we have that opportunity.
But to me, it's like, just to clarify that point, if you're trying to justify UPB and you give what you title 5 proofs, and I tackle the 5 proofs, and your response is, I didn't have time to prepare, that strikes me as that when they're the 5 proofs you give, surely, like, it's not like I'm trying to reference the end of your book or per se. It is literally the 5 proofs that you give. But of course, I'll let you know the kind of topics I want to get to, because it's a better way of doing it. Look, man, like if you're describing UPB as simply self-contradictions, then the good news is that I accept it. But if you call that UPB, then to use the analogy that we used at the beginning, you haven't got out of bed to even fight this beast. You are laying in bed intellectually masturbating. It's just, you're in the descriptive world. Whereas if you always have the if clauses, then you've got Kant's hypothetical imperative, and in which case you've come up to this beast, you've soiled your dress, you've ran into the forest, you've stabbed a rabbit that Kant killed, centuries ago, and now you're gloating, that you've had the holy grail of philosophy. Whereas what you actually have to prove is the categorical imperative. And it seems that every time we try to get down to that, you just navigate through the 3 definitions that I give. And the one that's strongest is that you're just describing something that's self-contradictory. So the last thing I'll say on this front, and then I'll leave it to yourself, is, look, don't you think, what's the reason that your UPB is not vitiating academia in the same way as Hume can? Now, it could be politicized. Science and philosophy is politicized. But what's more likely, that your peers just don't like you because of your views on X, Y, and Z, and they're just not going to take your argument seriously? Basically there's this conspiracy, as it were, or could it just be that you're not quite the person who has got the Holy Grail, as it were? My thesis to the audience is it's the latter, and man, my hat comes off to you. Like anyone that attempts to do this stuff, as you said, it's so important. But as you write in your book, if you're wrong, it's going to be both entertaining and edifying, and it is entertaining. But edification requires that you accept the criticisms and deal with them sufficiently, and I don't think you've done that. So the last thing I just want to say, I guess, last thing is, I know I've come off rough, as it were, but thank you for having the debate, Stefan. I'm sure we can go again at some point on another topic. And you know what? Anyone who publishes something and is willing to have exchanges, it's a good thing. So thank you very, very much, and thank you to the audience.
Yeah, my pleasure. I have debated a number of academics. I've presented at universities, and as to why it's not burning down academia, again, not to put myself in any kind of equation to Socrates, but of course we do remember Socrates' relationship with the sophists was not particularly positive. In fact, sophists hated Socrates with a burning passion. And the fact, of course, that I say that taxation is force and academics are paid for largely, certainly their jobs are protected and tenure is protected by the armed might of the state. They are, I think, largely corrupt in and of themselves. Of course, they're not going to want to entertain this kind of stuff. Very few people want to entertain theories that prove the immorality of their income or protection from market forces. So thanks.
Objectively insane thing to say. Like, one of the most assigned books to undergrads in all of political philosophy is Anarchy, State, and Utopia by Robert Nozick. Right? Like,
Right.
Academics have no problem whatsoever entertaining libertarian ideas. They just don't think much of Stefan Molyneux.
Yeah, and like, I could be wrong about this, but like, I'm pretty sure like phenomenal conservatism caught on, and like Michael Huemer pretty much made that up, didn't he? Right? Michael Huemer's like ANCAP leaning.
Sure, yeah, no, Michael Huemer's an ANCAP. He's Robert Nozick, Michael Huemer. I mean, there are like a good handful of these people who are like actually like libertarian academics who are, taken super seriously in academic philosophy, and sometimes much more than I actually think they should be. But that's that's me. Like if we're just talking.
I mean, the money is with libertarians too, and like classical liberals, like all those people. I was actually talking about it with Matt Sitman. We were talking about like the funding that conservatives get, and like, a lot of I actually have colleagues. There's like, I think it's like the National Institute for like Human Freedom or something like that. It's like that Koch funded organization or whatever for like libertarian ideas. Like there's tons
of that shit floating around. If you were like a graduate student in philosophy and you just want to like go to a bunch of conferences where people fly you out there and put you up at a hotel, like just like faded interest in libertarianism.
Totally. I have a bunch of friends. Yeah, I have this friend she's like a colleague of mine. She works on like Hobbes, and she was like, I heard about this organization that are going to fly me out just if I just like show some light interest in like classical liberal ideas. Like they just want to have more legitimacy. There is so much money for these ideas. I mean,
yeah, because they're like libertarian donors who are like very interested in spreading these ideas in academia. But like, even aside from that, right? I mean, there are people who are, I mean, like, yes, that's true. I mean, I always found it funny, right? Because there's something called the Templeton Foundation, which is like the religious version of this, and then there are all the libertarian ones. And it's like, I thought it was funny that like, theism and libertarianism are the two philosophical positions that like, they're like where there's like actually money getting thrown around to get you to take them seriously. But whatever.
It's like there's nothing more as a grad student, like being religious and a libertarian, like you're going to get like the most amount of free money like possible. It's true. I know people who also benefited from the Templeton Foundation also. So
yeah.
It's also like, I also really like Stefan Molyneux's answer to sort of rationality rules as like rhetorical question, because it's just like no sane person would be satisfied with that answer. Like I take it that like rationality rules was kind of making like an appeal to higher order evidence. Like if your theory is so groundbreaking and original,
Yeah.
how come none of the people who we expect to be like educated and reflective take it seriously? And then Stefan Molyneux's rebuttal is just like, oh, well, all of those people are like the dudes who killed Socrates. So it's just like,
yeah,
Yeah.
and again, all of those people fucking assigned their undergraduates Robert Nozick. Like they do not object to taking libertarian ideas serious. Like the fact that he draws some libertarian conclusions from his moral theory is nowhere on the list of reasons why it's not taken seriously by academic political philosophers. Like they, I mean, look, people draw libertarian political conclusions from all kinds of moral theories. Like that's not like nobody would reject it just for that, right? I mean, that's
Yeah.
yeah.
I do find the psychology of Stefan Molyneux fascinating. Like I'm trying to figure out, like, throughout this whole thing, I just like, like, how much is he a grifter? Like, how much is he just so arrogant and so full of himself? Like, I feel like it's got to be a combination of those things. Like, and I don't know, like, I'd be fascinating to like be his like psychoanalyst or something, because it's just so weird what's going on with him. With like, and that answer, I think, to that question is like a prime example of that. And like that his viewers, I mean, how many of them actually thought? I don't know, like I'm always skeptical of like certain kinds of like online content creators where I wonder how much of their audience is actually like buying into it and how much of them just like find it amusing or like are hate watching them. But I don't know. I mean, it did seem like he had quite a following. So
Yeah, I mean, he definitely had and again, probably still has, for better or for worse, they're like all siloed off to some platform that, we've all only vaguely heard of, but probably still has like a pretty hardcore, like the hardcore is very hardcore, right? Like I think that's how big a chunk the hardcore is. I mean, that's always so hard to say. All right, we've got 2 minutes left on the clock. Let's see if they say anything else.
all right.
Thanks very much. Please don't forget to check out Rationality Rules on YouTube. I will put a link below. You have a game. Do you want to just mention that just before we close off?
Sure, that's very generous of you. And likewise, whenever I put this on my channel, everybody, I'll leave a link to Stefan's channel below, and you can go check it out. Basically, I made a game titled Debunked, and the premise is essentially, I don't know if anyone's ever played Exploding Kittens, but it's similar to that in the sense that you have logical arguments, tends to be the ones that are for God, the watchmaker analogy, the Kalam cosmological, and with the fallacies that they commit, you basically play them on top / trying to mess with other people's hands, and it's a simple concept but hard to explain. But it's basically a card game, and I'm sure you'll appreciate it. It's with the effort of just trying to improve people's both appreciation of and capacity to reason with logical fallacies.
And the good news is that no kittens are harmed in the making of the card game. So yeah, thanks everyone for listening. It was a great tussle, a great tangle. I hope that people...
All right.
That one went long because I guess there was no Q&A, right? So there's no like
there's no good natural. Yeah, we always skip the Q&A, but there, since it was just them the whole time. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it just felt like there was like, I mean, I was entertained by that. I'm glad I watched it. As far as that goes, I feel like if you're gonna like do it, like if you're gonna be in the business of like keeping up with like what Stefan Molyneux thinks, which is a weird business to be in, but if you are, it's probably a good one to watch. But like, I don't know. It also feels like there was like an hour of scene setting before before they got to the.
We could have probably skipped that in retrospect if we would have looked into it. I mean, in a sense, I feel like it was like satisfying to go through the whole thing to like see where it was leading. But on the other hand, definitely that scene setting was just like so over the top. But it was also really amusing to just watch. Amusing and frustrating to watch Stefan Molyneux just like ramble, like that undergrad essay. Like it was excruciating, but also really amusing and like add to the full story, I feel like, of the debate, even though it was so painful. So I think I'm kind of two minds. I think it was like worth like kind of like pushing ourselves through that, but at the same time, terrible.
Yeah, somebody Jeb says in the chat, isn't it kind of Matt McManus's job to keep up with this weird thing? That is totally Matt's job. He actually did write a review of Molyneux's Universally Rational Behavior, Universally Preferable Behavior book, because of course he did. It doesn't seem to be online anymore. I couldn't find it, but I know he did write that at one point. But I don't know. It just seemed like once they actually got to it, it was like the last hour and however long was just them, like, Stephen gets to makes one solid criticism of the view.
I guess two, right? Because he made the view about like the equivocation and then also the I guess he didn't really get to do the begging the question one, but
yeah. So he made the equivocation one, right? And then he just, like, in a very gentlemanly way, he was just kind of like, okay, whatever, like I think I made my point, but we can move on. And then he tried to make the begging the question one, and then Stefan said he was ambushed by, it's an ambush if you bring up like what he said in the book, and then he kind of referred a few times to his criticisms of the rest of the syllogisms in the book. And then, like, the rest of it was just kind of them going around in this weird circle about, like, Stephen tries to explain, like, the Azot gap, like, tries to explain that Stefan is only actually establishing these extremely boring hypothetical imperatives that that you like, yeah, sure, if you have some moral goal, then, like, here's the thing you should do, totally uncontroversial, right? As I said, you've slain a rabbit that Kant killed hundreds of years ago, and then Stefan said, oh, look, here's all these cases where you derive an ought statement, and him just continually saying, yeah, but I'm not claiming to do anything but kill the rabbit.
yeah.
And Stefan not quite getting that, and then Stefan getting bored and, like, and trying to, like, turn the debate into, what about, like, the ethics of force. And by the way, just I realize this is like sort of not good. I mean, this is like a little Rain Man-ish on my part that I can't just let this go, but like all of the stuff about, like, oh, you want to use violence. It's like, yeah, you want to enforce property rights. It's all violence. Like, this is silly.
Yeah, I mean, I thought I'm seeing Joshua Pym there kind of saying he'd give, I guess, Stephen like a 6 out of 10. I mean, I think he did a little, I think, like, given the context,
Yeah.
like, I feel like this was one of, like, I think these kinds of debates, like, rarely have, like, very satisfying moments, like, very rarely. Like, you'll often get people kind of screaming at each other, and then, like, each audience hears what they want to hear. But what's satisfying about this is, I think, like, this, you did just get a moment where you could see Stefan really fall apart there. And I think that was, like, I think possibly a result of, like, of Stephen's very, like, polite, laser focused method of just, like, going and accepting a bunch of his ridiculous statements that he could finally get to the point. And I think it did result in a rare satisfying moment, in my opinion, of really seeing, like, transparently Stefan Molyneux get, like, very rattled and, like, and obviously, like, I mean, it resulted in a bunch of his viewers, like, getting really mad at him, right? It resulted in a bunch of his own fans, like, unsubscribing. So that's pretty satisfying.
Yeah, I mean, if we could just ignore the first hour, and then also ignore the fact that Stephen was simultaneously defending some, like, not very plausible views of his own, right? Then it's like, I don't know, 9.5 out of 10. I mean, like, it was great, right?
Yeah, totally. So I agree. I mean, and I think it was, I like, I mean, as excruciating as that, like, kind of table setting at the beginning was, I like the idea like in principle of steel manning each other's position. Because I guess like it seemed like they were maybe engaging with each other on Twitter for like a long time. So they had a lot of back and forth. And like I like the idea that they're like, okay, well, you have to try to strawman my position. Like so from as like an intellectual exercise, I find I like that. And I have a feeling that was probably mostly like Steven's idea. I'm guessing that was like him being like, if I'm going to debate, we should do it this way. Yes, he defends some weird kind of like cringy, like undergrad sort of philosophy, but yeah.
We don't mean you, Ethan. You're one of the good ones. So, all right. Well, it is almost midnight. We should call this to close.
Definitely.
So we're gonna be back on Monday. We've got Sean Richmond coming on. We're going to talk about Mad Men. It's going to be the anniversary of that show coming out. He has an article about it in Jacobin that's really fun. So that is going to be on Monday here. You guys want to plug what you got to plug?
Yeah, you guys can check me out on the Plastic Pills podcast. We have an episode coming out. We just had a conversation with Matt Sitman from Know Your Enemy. It's a great conversation. We got into some of the philosophical underpinnings of conservative thought. So check that out.
Yeah, I have a YouTube channel which is tentatively titled Mouthy Infidel. So yeah, you can check that out. I should upload more than I do, but I'm working on being more consistent. So
all right, sounds good. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Yep.
All right. Left is best. Good night.